Hello, hello. How's everybody doing? Am I live? Are we live? How's everybody? Yes, we are. Okay. Let's see. Question period. October 10th. Take that away. Add that. Okay. So, Parliament is still ground to a halt, apparently. Not a lot can be done in terms of, in terms of the government doing their job due to Trudeau withholding these documents. Find it still quite interesting. We're on like day 8, 9, or whatever of these documents still being withheld from the public and the House of Commons. On top of all of this, Pierre Poilievre did a half an hour, 40-minute speech talking about the pro-terror groups that are in our country right now. The ones that were openly chanting death to Canada, burning the Canadian flag, all of that. The unnecessary violence that has bled its way into Canada due to the conflict in the Middle East. So we're going to take a look. I've started this stream an hour early because I wanted to watch this. I figured it would be better to watch it with people than to watch it alone. So let's take a look.
Costs more. Food price inflation has been 36% higher in Canada than in the United States of America because of our brutal carbon tax. 1 in 10 Torontonians now have to go to a food bank every single month. There are 1,400 homeless encampments in Ontario after 9 years of Trudeau and the NDP Liberals. They've doubled the debt, doubled housing costs, given Canadians the worst mortgage debt as a share of GDP of any G7 country. Today, Stats Canada reported that the gap between rich and poor is at its highest level in recorded history, after NDP Liberal money printing inflated the assets of the super rich while inflating the cost of living for everyone else. And the Parliamentary Budget Officer released another report today on the carbon tax. And that report confirmed everything I've been saying about this horrible tax, this ripoff. It showed that 60% of Canadians pay more in the carbon tax than they get back in rebates. 100% of middle-class Canadians lose out. And that gap will get worse as the government goes ahead with its Liberal NDP plan to quadruple the tax to 61 cents a litre over the next 5.5 years. 61 cents a litre will mean we have among the highest fuel taxes in the world. Next door in the U.S., they have no carbon tax. Our trucks, our businesses, our workers, our money will pour over the border, leaving behind a nuclear winter for our economy. Grocery stores won't be able to get their goods. Factories won't be able to get their parts. Workers won't be able to get their paychecks as trucks can no longer afford to fuel the transportation of the essentials of life. And that will mean desperate poverty for countless people. That's why we need a carbon tax election where Canadians can choose between a 61 cent a litre carbon tax or axing the carbon tax altogether. An NDP Liberal costly carbon tax coalition that tax your food, punish your work, take your money, double your housing costs and unleash crime and chaos, or common sense Conservatives who will axe the tax, build the homes, fix the budget and stop the crime. The worst crime of all is the crimes that have been targeting our Jewish communities. We have seen a 251% increase in hate crimes in Canada under Trudeau and the NDP Liberals. Those crimes were up 165% before October 7th. And while the attacks of that day haunt us still, we cannot blame the chaos on our streets on some foreign problem. This hate crime targeting our Jewish people and our countless other peoples was out of control before then. And by the way, there have been wars in the Middle East for decades. They didn't spill onto our streets. In the 1967 war, in the War of Yom Kippur, the two intifadas, the Hezbollah-Israel war of 2006, we didn't have fire bombings of synagogues in Canada during those conflicts. We didn't have bullets flying through the window of children's schools during those conflicts. We didn't have bricks throwing through the windows of the Pride of Israel during those conflicts. What has changed? What has changed is we have a Prime Minister with a radical and divisive ideology that turns Canadian against Canadian. He has broken our borders. He's allowed repeat violent criminals to run free in our streets. He's allowed ISIS terrorists to come in through our immigration system, even after they were videoed.
The Trudeau government allowed a former SS soldier into the House of Commons. And they clapped and celebrated it. Because they didn't know. Our fucking current government is an actual joke.
Taped, cutting up human bodies in the Middle East as part of the ISIS organization. They come into Canada and he gives them citizenship in this country where they plot to carry out new terrorist attacks. Justin Trudeau is not worth the cost, crime, chaos, and he's not worth the risk of terrorism. Furthermore, we have known terrorist groups able to operate legally and with impunity in Canada. I pointed out the other day Samadoun, which held these horrific protests where they were calling for death to Israel, death to America, death to Canada. They burned our flag. These monsters are a front for another terrorist group in the Middle East that has been banned for 20 years. The Americans
banned in Germany and Israel
tackled this terrorist group, but why in Canada does Justin Trudeau continue to pander to these terrorist supporters by allowing them to operate legally, even when they have violated our anti-terrorism laws? Another example, of course, is the Houthis. The Houthis have been operating on our country, even though they can operate in our country. We don't know for sure if they have because we don't have laws to stop or even surveil it. But the Houthis are a front for the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, an organization that is the biggest and most well-organized terrorist group in the world, which supports Hamas and Hezbollah. This organization...
Canadians, fellow Canadians, it's time to wake up. This is scary information right here. This is fucking insane. Our government has failed on levels beyond anything imaginable. And they continue to do this. They continue to fail and let down Canadians. The Liberal government has destroyed our country for 9 years straight.
Murdered 55 Canadian citizens by shooting a missile at a civilian aircraft over Iran, blowing it out of the sky 4 years ago. And yet Trudeau allowed them to stay legal, raising money and terrorizing our people for years after that. Now, a related front group, the Houthis, continues to fire missiles at civilians, attack merchant ships that carry critical civilian and humanitarian aid, killing civilian workers on those ships. The Americans banned the Houthis back in January. The Liberals at the time said they were thinking about it. What is there to think about? Since October 7th, the terrorist attacks, Houthi terrorists have disregarded international law. They carry out attacks in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. According to the American Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, since November 2023, the Houthis have launched unprecedented attacks against international maritime vessels in the Red Sea and Gulf of Aden, as well as military forces positioned in the area to defend the safety and security of commercial shipping. These attacks against international shipping have endangered mariners, disrupted the free flow of commerce, and interfered with the navigational rights and freedoms. Earlier this month, a Houthi spokesman celebrated the attacks they had done and said they've targeted 193 ships linked to the Israeli, American, and British enemy. They've also launched hundreds of missiles at innocent Israeli civilians to support Hamas. The Houthis operate with the support of the criminal regime in Tehran who helped organize the October 7th attack. The murderous Iranian regime uses groups like Houthis, Hezbollah, and Hamas to spread violence and terror throughout the world. That's why the Americans have designated them as a terrorist group, and they have called on others to do the same. Jewish Canadians and all Canadians deserve to feel safe. They deserve to know that they will not be targeted by terrorist groups that operate here, launder money here, finance organized crime here, and foment hatred here. And for these reasons, common sense conservatives are calling on the NDP Liberal government to list the Houthis as a terror group under Section 83.05 of the anti-terrorism law. That will allow our law enforcement the power to seize their bank accounts, shut down their operations, criminalize recruitment, logistics, and planning on Canadian soil to keep our people safe. And safety is what we want. We want peace again. We want to bring home the country we knew and still love, where anyone from anywhere can do anything, where hard work earns a powerful paycheck that buys affordable food, gas.
It actually blows my mind that he has to campaign with these kind of signs up. You read the sign that he has in front of him and the two that are listed up behind him. It actually blows my mind that these are the kind of discussions that have to be had now in our country.
And homes in safe communities. That's the Canada we knew. That's the Canada we love. Let's bring it home.
We'll now take questions from the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Premier, for this important press conference. And actually, we know that Canada is a place for all, not for terrorists and terrorism. What we have seen in the last few years, that some weird demonstrations, I call it chaos, that include people who insult Canada and wish death to our beautiful country. And the most painful thing is to burn my flag, my Canadian flag. This is so painful for all of the Canadians. The people who do this are covering their faces. We don't know their identity. And this is also a big problem, because as a journalist and media, Canadian media from Middle East roots, we receive some threats. My question is, why the police and the authorities do not take actions against this? Because it is not one time, two times, it is repeated over a long time, and there is some violence, there is some threat for many people, and we do not used to have Canada like this. If you, in your position, you are the opposition leader, what you can do to return Canada now, and if you are the Prime Minister, God willing, what you can do to make our culture is quiet and safe again.
Thank you very much for that question, and I'm so sorry that you have faced these threats. This is another example of our country devolving into chaos. Everything is broken. When we have patriotic journalists facing threats of violence from terrorist sympathizers who now operate with impunity after 9 years of Trudeau.
Exactly. It should be a law in our country chanting death to our country and burning our flag. You should be sent to prison right away. No ifs, ands, or buts.
The NDP and their radical, divisive, dangerous ideologies. The police need to enforce existing laws and arrest anyone who's making these threats against journalists. We need to lock up violent offenders and keep them behind their bars with jail and not bail, with mandatory jail time for serious violent offenses. We need to ban the terrorist organizations that have been fomenting this hate and these attacks, Samadoun, Houthis, and others. Samadoun was on our streets 2 or 3 days ago, celebrating the genocide, the biggest attack on Jews since the Holocaust, burning our flags, organizing hatred, and making overt calls for violence against our people. Samadoun, the Houthis, and their organizers should be arrested. They should be put behind bars. We should secure our borders to keep terrorists and those who work with them out of our country and keep our country safe again. And we need a prime minister who will unite our people and bind up the wounds of the nation.
The RCMP is on the payroll of the Justin Trudeau government. So whenever you see or hear anything about the RCMP, it's very questionable about what they get themselves into and how they involve themselves into certain situations. The RCMP, at the end of the day, they probably won't be doing much at all when it comes to the things Pierre is talking about here. And that's just the sad reality of our current government and our system as a whole.
By bringing home the country that we knew and still love.
Thank you. Next question.
Shahrzad Ghani from Epoch Times Persian. Mr. Paliev, now IRGC is listed as a terrorist organization. What is your plan in the future as like a Paliev's government plan to take some actions? Looks like just listing IRGC as a terrorist organization is not enough. What is your plan to just take some more actions specifically for Iranian community here to feel safe, that they're living in a safe environment without interference from Islamic Republic? And also, what actions can be taken to immediately deport those who have ties with Islamic Republic?
Thank you. Great question. And first of all, thank you to the courageous Persian population in Canada who have consistently stood up against the regime in Tehran in massive demonstrations, which I have been honored to attend. The Persian community, like the Jewish community, is under attack. The IRGC and 700 Iranian agents are operating with impunity on our soil, threatening, harassing, abusing our Persian and Jewish people here in Canada. And it's time for the RCMP and the police to track down these agents, charge them, and if they are not citizens or permanent residents, they need to be expelled from our country. We see top officials from the Iranian government that have been seen in gyms and living in mansions and enjoying the plunder that they stole from the Iranian people here in our country. They should be expelled from our country. We should issue deportations on them because they are terrorizing our Persian people here.
Chris Ruth is back, the ultimate chat troll. Here we go.
In Canada. We must make sure that IRGC cannot set up a proxy organization like they always do. That's what the Tehran does. The Tehran doesn't do it directly. They always get a proxy to do it. And so the Houthis could become that proxy in the future now that the IRGC is finally banned. We need to ban the Houthis. We need to quickly set up the foreign influence registry that the Liberals have been dragging their feet on. And that way we can expose anyone who's working for a foreign dictatorship. jail them if they break the law, expel them if they are harassing our population. We will once and again make this a safe place for all Canadians, Persian Canadians, Jewish Canadians, Canadians of all backgrounds. Thank you.
Thank you. Next question.
Hi, I'm Mr. Polyev. Good morning. I just wanted to pivot to something else. You voted in favor of the Bloc Québécois motion to boost OAS for some seniors. Is this something your party will do if elected? And I could just ask you to answer in English and French. Thank you.
Thank you. After 9 years of Trudeau and the NDP Liberals, seniors struggle to eat, heat, and house themselves. The rent has doubled. Mortgage payments have doubled. Food price inflation has been the worst in 40 years, and those prices have risen 36% faster in Canada than in the U.S., proving it's not a global phenomenon that's causing the higher grocery prices. It's here at home. And we know that the carbon tax is principally responsible for the higher food prices. Of course, if you tax the farmer who grows the food and the trucker who ships the food, you tax all who buy the food. So we're of the view that seniors need more purchasing power. And that's what we signaled with that vote. There are other ways to do it, though. For example, by axing the carbon tax and lowering income tax, you can allow seniors to keep more of their pension and their retirement income and make those dollars go further. So as we develop our platform, we will bring forward a low-tax plan that allows seniors to have more powerful pensions and to bring home the affordable prices that will allow them to have a dignified retirement, which the people who built our country deserve more than anyone else. Thank you. Merci beaucoup. Après 9 ans de Justin Trudeau et les libéraux, les aînés ont de la misère à payer leurs factures. Le coût de logement a doublé. Le coût de nourriture a augmenté 36% plus rapidement ici au Canada qu'aux États-Unis. Ce qui met de l'évidence que ce n'est pas un phénomène international, mais c'est lié aux taxes et aux dépenses inflationnistes de Justin Trudeau. On voit qu'un nombre record des gens doivent aller aux banques alimentaires. Donc, les conservateurs ont voté pour signaler que les aînés devraient avoir plus de pouvoir d'achat. Il y a d'autres façons de les aider. On peut couper les impôts. Les aînés paient beaucoup d'impôts sur leurs pensions et sur leurs fonds de retraite. Et nous regardons des propositions pour couper les impôts pour tout le monde. Ça va récompenser le travail des plus jeunes, des petites entreprises, mais aussi les aînés. Et nous allons réduire le coût de la vie en éliminant les déficits inflationnistes et en réparant le budget. C'est ça notre plan de gros bon sens. Couper taxes et impôts, bâtir des logements, réparer le budget et stopper les crimes.
Thank you. Next question.
Ms. Polyev, good morning. David Menzies with Rebel News. Given the immigration minister's shocking comments about the lack of security vetting for migrants, should Canada suspend bringing any more refugees from Gaza?
We can't let anyone in unless they have been thoroughly vetted. All of their background, all of their affiliations need to be clearly vetted. Because you're quite right in saying that this government of Justin Trudeau has let in criminals and terrorists. In the case of, think of this case of this apparent ISIS fighter who appears to have been in a video cutting up a human body on a crucifix in the Middle East. He did this, according to this video, before he was granted admission to Canada and then given citizenship in this country. And then finally...
There you have it. The Liberal government at its finest, ladies and gentlemen. That is some of the most vile shit I think I have heard in a while.
We had to arrest him because the French reached out and said they had intelligence that he was about to carry out a massive terrorist attack here in the Greater Toronto area. And then there was a second terrorist who got into this country and then ultimately was preparing an attack on Jews from Canada to go to New York, where he was going to kill the Jewish population there. Justin Trudeau has lost control of our borders. His radical ideology, his total incompetence, and his appalling border policies are dangerous to the country. When I am Prime Minister, yes, we will welcome immigrants, but we will do so by vetting security and their lawfulness, ensuring that the people who come here are safe and our citizens are likewise safe.
Thank you. This will be the final question.
Jeff Gray, Globe and Mail. I wanted to ask another question about the PBO report, which also says that, according to Environment Canada data, the industrial carbon price is responsible for more greenhouse gas emissions than the price for consumers. So are you committed to keeping the industrial carbon price in place?
Well, as you know, the Liberals have given heavy industry an exemption from the carbon tax. They are under a different policy that is pretty much run by the provinces. The federal government is not administering that policy in almost any province. It is provincial governments across the country that do that. My focus is on axing the carbon tax, which has driven up gas and diesel by 17 cents a litre, has driven up home heating costs by hundreds of dollars every single year, and which Trudeau plans to quadruple to 61 cents a litre, a policy that would cripple our economy and do nothing for the environment other than push production to dirty foreign dictatorships. Trudeau wants to push jobs and businesses out and global pollution up. I want to bring costs down so that we can bring home clean, green Canadian production to our economy. Let's axe the tax. Let's bring it home.
Can we get that in French?
Merci beaucoup. Le politique, moi je vais abolir la taxe carbone qui augmente le coût pour les consommateurs, le coût de tout, le coût de nourriture, de l'essence, des matériaux de base pour construire des logements sont plus chers en passant à cause de cette taxe. Les politiques industrielles sont gérées par les provinces, y compris au Québec. Ils ont déjà leur propre politique là-dessus. Donc, mes efforts seront pour abolir la taxe carbone sur les consommateurs.
I'm sorry, I went in French. I just wanted to ask you about involuntary treatment. In Ontario, this is something municipalities are calling for. The big city mayors, they started a motion on this, and they are debating and updating the Healthcare Act to actually implement involuntary treatment. I know in the past you said you were open to it, but you needed more time to learn about it. So where do you currently stand on this?
Thank you very much. Great question. We just heard testimony from the parents of a beautiful young girl named Brianna from British Columbia who the authorities released from a psychiatric hospital despite the fact that her parents had begged them to keep her in treatment. She had stabbed her hand with a pencil. She was clearly a very big danger to herself. The system released her, offered, of course, crack pipes and other drug paraphernalia for her to safely use drugs. She ended up in a homeless encampment where she died of an overdose, a teenager. There's no question in my mind that she should have been in mandatory, involuntary, psychiatric, and substance abuse treatment rather than in a homeless encampment in a tent. So I believe for children and for prisoners who are behind bars, there should be mandatory drug treatment when they are found to be incapable of making decisions for themselves. For adults, again, I'm still doing a lot of research on how that would work. But what I will say is we need to defund the unsafe government supply of drugs that the Trudeau and the NDP regimes are pushing on the population. We need to ban hard substances, start to prosecute drug criminals, scan the shipping containers to stop illegal drugs and guns from coming in, and treat addiction with rehab and recovery so that we can bring our loved ones home drug-free. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Defense Minister Bill Blair told the Star yesterday that nuclear strikes on facilities, or strikes on nuclear facilities,
Changed his mind.
contrary to the law of armed conflict. What is your response to that?
He changed his mind today. You have to look at his flip-flop today in committee. So, well, I've already stated my stance multiple times, but you should just note that yesterday the Liberals were saying that they had no problem with Iran, a genocidal, unstable, terrorist regime that had killed 55 Canadian citizens and is threatened to wipe Israel and America off the map. The Liberals said they had no problem with that country and that dictatorship getting nuclear weapons. Today, Bill Blair flip-flopped in committee and said that there would be certain circumstances where a strike against a nuclear weapons manufacturing facility would be allowed. So you have to ask Bill Blair where he stands, because he keeps changing his mind every single day. That's why we cannot trust Justin Trudeau and the NDP Liberals. They allowed the IRGC to remain.
They're a sneaky, two-faced government that says one thing and does something completely different. This is fucking terrifying.
Legal in Canada for 4 years after it murdered 55 of our Canadian citizens. They allow 700 IRGC terrorist agents to terrorize our streets here in Canada. And as of yesterday, we're of the view that that unstable terrorist regime should be allowed to develop nuclear weapons that could kill millions of people. This is an example of just how dangerous and radical the NDP Liberal government has become. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
And comments? Question commentaire. The honourable member for Prince George, Caribou Prince George.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
All right, we're going to move over to the rest of the House of Commons proceedings before question period starts. If you guys are new to the channel, make sure you hit that like button, hit that sub button, and let's get back into it. Thank you very much for joining.
Across the way is, if something is stolen from him, does he call the police or does he call a committee? We're talking about over $480 million, 186 conflicts of interest that the Auditor General has said and has identified with that $400 million of taxpayers' funding that is gone, given to Liberal cronies, Liberal colleagues, people within that organization. All we're saying is allow the RCMP the opportunity to read the documents, unredacted. So to you, Mr. Speaker, through you, to our honourable colleague, if somebody steals something from you, do you call the police or do you call a committee?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, where to start? I think the best way to start it is read what is actually taking place today. The Conservative Party is asking through a motion to collect documents unredacted and give them to the RCMP. What do the RCMP have to say about that tactic? Quote, there is a significant risk that the motion could be interpreted as a circumvention of normal investigative processes and, please listen to this, charter protections. Now, this isn't me saying it, this is the RCMP. This is the body that you want to give the information to. My God, how much simpler can it be to understand that? I don't understand how they don't understand how simple it is, this issue, Mr. Speaker.
Guys, Chris Ruth is a time traveler. He has gone into the future, seen everything Pierre has done, and is coming back now to warn us. Jesus Christ, man.
Question commentaire. The honourable member for Terrebonne. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Frankly, what I'm hearing, it's a bit like a 5-year-old telling his mother, listen, Mum,
it doesn't matter if I stole a bit of money from the piggy bank because, I got, sand thrown at me by another kid. That's what it sounds like. It makes no sense. I'll remind him of something. In 2010, former Prime Minister Harper led a very similar battle to not give documents to this House, secret documents, on Afghan detainees, and he lost that battle. The Speaker at the time, Mr. Milligan, had asked and had reminded the government of the primacy of the House of Commons and had requested the government provide all the documents, and that's what the Speaker is saying this time as well. So why do the Liberals continue to argue that they don't have to provide the documents when the House has required them to do it? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, I think it would help a great deal if members...
At the end of the day, you're free to vote for whoever you want, but I'll ask you this question. After 10 years, almost a decade, of the Liberal government in power, are you happy as a Canadian right now?
You disagree with the RCMP and the Auditor General, and you don't care about the Charter of Rights and the Constitution. Because if you insist on the conservative spin, what you're doing is you're walking on individual rights and processes that have been well established, and the RCMP and the Auditor General, both independent offices, have made that very clear. If the member would like, I can share the letter with her.
I need to remind I just need to remind individuals to actually come through the chair when we're talking and having this debate. Questions and comments? The honourable for Fleetwood Port Kels.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. I think the question is, if there's wrongdoing, somebody needs to be punished. There's allegations, of course, but nothing has been proven. But to my honourable colleague, when the RCMP tells you it doesn't need the material that the Conservatives want produced, when the RCMP tells you they can't use the material that would be provided if the Conservative motion were to succeed, what should we then take from that about how best to proceed with the kind of investigation that people seem to call for?
Parliamentary Secretary, Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. The simple answer is to allow our independent offices, our independent agencies, to do what it is they're supposed to do. We have an RCMP agency which is recognized around the world. Second to, I would suggest to you, no other agency, Mr. Speaker, or law enforcement group. They know their stuff. They know what they're doing. I think Canadians have more confidence in the RCMP as an institution than they would have on the Conservative Party on this file at the very least. And I'm trying to be kind, Mr. Speaker, here. I would suggest to you that we let individuals do the job that they're supposed to be doing. On this issue, allow more discussion in standing committees. That's why we have standing committees, to be able to go through the documents. That's where our Auditor General has made presentation, the RCMP have made presentation. It provides all forms of opportunities to ensure accountability and transparency. It's up to the Conservative Party in particular, a little concerned about the Bloc, but Conservative Party in particular, to stop with the political games at the cost of the interests of Canadians and start looking at ways in which we can be supporting Canadians, not playing games with Canadians at a great expense.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Sarnia-Lambton.
Speaker. A couple clarifications and then a simple question for the member opposite. First of all, the Liberal government is pretending to care about people's charter rights, which, would be new if it was believable. But this is the government that has violated all of them. Freedom of expression, mobility rights. Let's talk about the Illegal Emergency Measures Act, on and on. So that. Then the member also alluded to the fact that there's no other Conservatives that want to speak to the motion, and that's why we have amendments and sub-amendments. Well, I have not had a chance, Mr. Speaker, to speak to this privileged debate, and I would love to do so. So those are my clarifications. My question is this. The Auditor General says there's 186 conflicts of interest with the $400 million given to people's companies. The whistleblower said there was criminality involved. If the Liberal government really believes there's nothing to see here, why won't they produce the papers?
Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the government has cooperated and produced the papers. That's been produced, just like Brian Mulroney and other levels of government have done in the past. The issue for the Conservative Party is they're saying, well, there's a redaction in certain aspects of the papers. Well, that happens in government. And now the Conservatives have said, well, we're going to force those unredacted papers, and we're going to go against what the RCMP are saying. We're going to go against what the Auditor General is saying. Why? Because they want to play a political game of political cheap shots. That is the reason why. And I look forward to hearing the member's comments. And I would encourage every member in opposition, when they stand up, to start their remarks by indicating that they do not support the recommendations or the concerns that have been raised by the RCMP, the Auditor General, and then through that recognize that they do not support the Charter of Rights and our Constitution. Because if they did, they would be listening to what those independent offices have to say, Mr. Speaker. And if they're not going to listen to what those independent offices have to say, then don't try to tell me that you're supporting the Charter of Rights. I won't buy that.
Resuming debate, and I will have to interrupt the honourable member in about 8 minutes. The honourable member for Calgary Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Member of my constituency.
Trudeau has been caught up in multiple scandals. This one is a very big one now. Over $400 million of taxpayer money just vanished, gone into businesses. His buddies' businesses, liberal businesses. Multiple times, over 186 times counted for this case alone.
It's not just a tale of corporate misconduct, but a glaring example of political interference at the highest levels of our government. Under the leadership of this Prime Minister, the Liberal government attempted to undermine the rule of law for political gain.
Also, if you're new here, Chris Ruth is just one of the greatest trolls I think I've ever seen on the internet.
Attorney General Jody Wilson-Raybould to intervene in the criminal prosecution of SNC-Lavalin. This engineering giant faced serious charges of fraud and corruption, yet the Prime Minister sought to offer them a deferred prosecution agreement, effectively allowing them to escape full accountability. This move was not only unethical, but also a blatant attempt to protect Liberal interests at the expense of justice. The fallout from this scandal was significant. It made Canada an ethical pariah in the eyes of its international peers. There are consequences, and it led to the resignation of key cabinet ministers. Wilson-Raybould and Jane Philpott, who could no longer stand by a government that prioritized political expediency over integrity. The Ethics Commissioner report was damning, concluding that the Prime Minister had indeed violated the Conflict of Interest Act by improperly pressuring the Attorney General. This is not the leadership Canadians deserve. It is our duty, as His Majesty's loyal opposition, to hold the Liberal government accountable and ensure that such abuses of power are never repeated. Next, the We Charity scandal was another example of the Liberal government's pattern of corruption. The Liberals awarded a $912 million contract to We Charity to administer a government program. It was later revealed that We Charity had close ties to the Prime Minister and his family, as well as former Finance Minister Bill Morneau. The controversy led to multiple parliamentary committee investigations and significant political fallout, including Morneau's resignation. The scandal damaged the public's trust again in the Liberal government and led to the calls for greater transparency and accountability in government contracting. Next, we turn to the incident involving the Winnipeg Labs. Here, we witnessed a civil servant being called to the bar of the House for failing to produce documents. This extraordinary action highlighted the importance of parliamentary oversight and the need for civil servants to comply with requests for information. The subsequent election, unnecessarily called to thwart this initiative, further demonstrated the lengths to which some will go to avoid accountability. More recently, we've seen the case of GC Strategies, where the refusal to answer questions at committee led to the principal of the company being brought to the bar and questioned by Parliament. Despite attempts by some members, notably from the Liberal Party, to give this individual a pass due to the stress he said this had caused him, I'm sure all grifters were awaiting the outcome of that. This incident
Oh,
serves
the
as a
grifters.
reminder
Watch
that
out
no
for the
individual
YouTube
organization
grifters, ladies and
is
gentlemen.
above the scrutiny of this House.
Watch out for the political grifters. Like, each and every one of them, at the end of the day, aren't just grifting.
$80,000 ultimately ballooned to approximately $60 million. The exact final cost remains unclear due to poor record keeping, highlighting significant issues with financial management and transparency under these Liberals. And now, we are confronted with a $400 million scandal involving a conflict of interest uncovered by the Auditor General. This scandal revolves around a now-defunct foundation responsible for distributing federal funds for green technology projects. The Auditor General's report identified 186 conflicts of interest in contracts tied to the fund, with money allegedly funneled to companies in which board members had vested interests. Mr. Speaker, you ruled that the government had clearly not fully complied with an order from the House to provide documents related to the foundation. As a result, you, Mr. Speaker, demanded the production of these documents before any other business of the House can be undertaken. This decisive action underscores the seriousness of the allegations and the need for immediate transparency. The Auditor General of Canada has found that the Prime Minister turned Sustainable Development Technologies Canada into a slush fund for Liberal insiders. The Auditor General's findings are damning. $334 million, 82% of the funding approved by the board over a 5-year period, was allocated to projects in which board members held a conflict of interest. An additional $59 million was given to projects outside the mandate of the foundation and broke contribution agreements and conflict of interest laws. The Auditor General made it clear that the blame for this scandal falls on the industry minister, who did not sufficiently monitor the contracts that were given to Liberal insiders. Where is the minister's accountability to this House? These events remind Canadians that Liberals cannot be trusted with the public purse. Ad scam, SNC Lavalin, Winnipeg Labs, We Charity, Arrive scam, and now the SDTC Green Slush Fund. Hundreds.
The laundry list for Justin Trudeau gets longer as he continues to bend over Canadians.
Refusing to cooperate, interference, manipulation, hallmarks of gangsters and Liberals. We are faced with a governing body that is holding on to the last shred of power, refusing to turn over the documents that you, Mr. Speaker, have instructed them to do. These events collectively paint a troubling picture of a system in need of reform. As representatives of the people, it is our duty to uphold these principles and to take decisive action when they are threatened. This is Parliament's role, and the flimsy excuse that it could violate charter rights is nonsense. Were that the actual case, this House would lose relevance. The country is going broke while Liberal insiders are stuffing taxpayers' funds into their pockets, and this government is doing all it can to ensure Canadians don't see that. I ask my colleagues in all parties if they really want Canadians to view their roles here as elected parliamentarians as irrelevant. If some puppet of the Department of Justice, at the request of the Prime Minister, made the parliamentarian job irrelevant, stand up and say so. No more. This is something that we have to address. I'll finish up the speech after question period, Mr. Speaker.
Thank the honourable member from Calgary Centre for recognizing that, and he will have 12 minutes and 50 seconds left on the clock when he resumes his speech.
What's up, Sean? How's it going? Yeah, it's a little weird. Some days it's like just a chill, small crowd of people, and then a day like today, it's just everybody. Everybody wants to give their opinions and hop into the chat, which I'm A-okay with. If you guys are new here, make sure you hit that like button, hit that sub button, and if you are in the chat, try and keep it respectful. If not, I might have to give you a little timeout.
Well, I've got good news, Mr. Speaker. The Canada Carbon Rebate will land in the bank accounts of Manitobans once again on October the 15th. On Tuesday, a Manitoba family of 4 will receive $300 because of that Canada carbon rebate. But there's more. Despite Conservative opposition, we have doubled the top-up for families living in rural areas, retroactive to April. So it's a double rural top-up. The best part is that because big polluters pay the most, Mr. Speaker, the vast majority of Canadians receive more back through the Canada carbon rebate, and those who pollute less save even more. It's fighting climate change, and for the first time in our history, Canada is on track to meet our climate goals. Thank you.
The honourable member from Edmonton, Wetaskiwin.
Mr. Speaker, today is World Mental Health Day, and it's my absolute pleasure to highlight the critical work of the Canadian Alliance for Mental Illness and Mental Health, or CAMI, a coalition of 18 national mental health organizations representing Canadians with lived experience with mental illness and their care providers. Each year, CAMI celebrates the champions of mental health, individuals that have made a powerful, positive impact on the mental health of Canadians. Earlier today, CAMI recognized this year's 7 champions, including my good friend and colleague, the Member of Parliament for my neighbour to the north, Edmonton Riverbend.
Bravo.
These 7 extraordinary individuals have demonstrated unparalleled dedication to improving mental health and substance use care across Canada. Through their relentless efforts and innovative approaches, they've made a profound impact on the lives of countless Canadians. Mr. Speaker, I ask all of my colleagues to join me in
186 is only based on the 50% files inspected. That, yeah. What else are they hiding? Right? It's, should be pretty telling how corrupt the Liberal government is.
Nova Scotia. The Canada carbon rebate will be distributed to Nova Scotians and deposited into their bank accounts on October 15. A family in Nova Scotia will receive $206 through the Canada carbon rebate. But it doesn't stop there. For a family living in rural Cape Breton, like in my riding of Sydney, Victoria, their October rebate will include a double rural top-up for a total amount of $288. Thanks to our climate plan, we're now on track to meet our climate goals for the first time in Canadian history. We're reducing our emissions, growing our economy, and tackling inflation, all while making life more affordable for Canadians. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Good job.
The Honourable Member for Abitibi Témiscamingue. From October 23rd to October 31st, young athletes aged 15 to 17 from all over Quebec will be taking part in the International School Sports Federation's School Olympic Games in Bahrain. There's some 60 athletes and parents here today on the Hill. And for many of them, this will be the result of countless hours of training and many sacrifices. All of this to live a unique experience. So unique it makes me jealous. These athletes will be wearing the fleur-de-lis, and they represent Quebec, and they show the colors of our country in the making. Mr. Speaker, my 2 boys, Jules and Léon, are athletes. And it's thanks to the Fondation Équipe Quebec, a new dream is possible for them to represent Quebec on the international stage. So I have a message for the delegation of young athletes here from Quebec. You are the trailblazers, the dream igniters. When you compete, you'll have the whole nation behind you because you make the dream of wearing Quebec's colors possible. You already have your medal. Thank you. The Honourable Member for Sackville-Preston, Chesapeake. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My friends from Nova Scotia, you will see the Canada's carbon rebate hit your bank account again on October 15th. You will receive $206 through the Canada carbon rebate. So this is we've made the carbon rebate fairer for rural residents by doubling the rural top-up retroactive to April. Mr. Speaker, while the Conservative leader is preoccupied with giving a free pass to his friends in big oil and eliminating rebates for Canadians, his refusal to fight climate change and his slogans against climate change will cost Canadians even more. Our government continues to reduce emissions while improving conditions for the lives of Canadians. Thank you.
The honourable member from Stormont.
Oh my God, Greg, are you okay? What the fuck was that?
The life of a remarkable community leader, Monsignor Kevin Maloney, who after 52 years as an ordained priest left us last month. Father Kevin, as he was best known, dedicated his life to serve with compassion and kindness, touching the hearts of countless people in Cornwall and SD&G. His contributions to the Catholic Church and to our entire community were immeasurable, and his recognition as the 2018 Cornwall Citizen of the Year was one of the many accolades he truly deserved. Father Kevin was more than a leader. He was a beacon of hope and joy, known for his infectious laughter and kind spirit. Whether at church or community suppers or charity events, he brought laughter and light to every room that he entered. Father Kevin will be deeply missed, and as we reflect on his life and the impact he made, I will say this. At the pearly gates up above, God had an easy answer in welcoming one of Cornwall's best angels to heaven. Rest in peace, my friend, and thank you for a life of service.
The Honourable Member for Ottawa-Vanier. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ontario, Canada's carbon rebate will be in your bank account once again on October 15th. Ontario families of 4 will receive $280 next week. Mr. Speaker, that's a total of $1,120 this year for Ontario and Ottawa-Vanier families.
Because the rebates are just a way for the government to shift money around to different incomes. And look, man, the carbon tax, they will tax the ever-living shit out of you. And I actually get the carbon tax. I get it quarterly. It's $140. It is not enough to cover one tank of gas. It's barely enough to cover a week of groceries. And the Liberals constantly say 8 out of 10 Canadians that receive the carbon tax, where it's applicable, will receive more money than they get taxed. I do not believe it for a second. And there are Canadians that actually don't even see the rebate at all and are getting taxed for the carbon tax.
More affordable. Mr. Speaker, today the PBO released a report that clears the air for Canadians and calls out the Conservative campaign of misinformation. Big polluters pay and more money goes back to Canadians.
Your party is the party of misinformation. It's the Liberal Party at its finest.
Will receive a rebate of $280 every 3 months. Every 3 months for a total of $1,120 this year. But the Conservatives would rather rip up the rebate, ignore climate change altogether, just to help out their rich oil and gas friends. But unlike Conservatives who fan the flames of conspiracies as wildfires, hurricanes and floods force Canadians from their homes, we're focused.
The same wildfires that this government failed to take control of. The same government that failed to remove the brush that caused the fires in the first place. And they want to sit here and blame climate change.
I'm going to invite the honourable member from Timmins James Bay, please, not to take the floor unless recognized by the chair. The honourable member from Prince George, Peace River, Northern Rockies.
After 9 years of the NDP Liberals, taxes are up, costs are up, crime is up, and time is up. Mr. Speaker, you have ruled that the NDP Liberals have violated a House order to turn over evidence to the police for a criminal investigation into the latest Liberal $400 million scandal, effectively obstructing justice. The Auditor General's findings that Liberal appointees at Sustainable Development Technology Canada gave nearly $400 million to their own companies with over 186 conflicts of interest, at a time when Canadians can't afford to eat, heat, and house themselves. The radical Environment Minister is directly involved in the scandal, as he was the former lobbyist for a board member's company, where he brought in $110 million for the company, a company the minister still owns shares in. The NDP Liberals' refusal to respect your ruling has paralyzed all our work to address the doubling of housing costs, food inflation, crime and chaos.
The Liberal government has raised minimum wage numerous times here in Ontario, all over, and it has done nothing to bring down the cost of food or the cost of living. Because when they raise minimum wage, these companies just end up jacking up all of the prices of groceries, or if you go to a fast food restaurant, wherever it is that minimum wage applies, you keep jacking it up, the companies continue to jack up the prices, It doesn't fix anything. It actually just makes it worse.
Mr. Speaker, there was a time in which the Conservatives actually supported putting a tax on carbon, but they flip-flopped on that, Mr. Speaker, and the leader of the far right today says that he is going to get rid of the carbon rebate, Mr. Speaker. That is most unfortunate because Canadians should be encouraged to participate in a positive way in regards to our environment, and giving the carbon rebate is a good thing, Mr. Speaker. They should flip-flop again, and let's get behind the carbon rebates.
The honourable member from Medicine Hat, Cardston, Warner.
Thank you, Speaker. Canadians are well aware.
Brown bag bikers at a motel. Wow. That's an interesting one. At the end of the day, I don't really care about these quote-unquote personal attacks that the Liberals always cry about. I actually think it's kind of funny when they give jabs and they take them and they give them. So, it doesn't really bother me.
To eat, heat, or house themselves. Speaker, you have ruled that the NDP Liberals have violated a House order to turn over evidence for a criminal investigation into this latest scandal, effectively obstructing justice. The government's refusal to respect your ruling has paralyzed Parliament, pushing aside all of our work to address the rising costs of housing, food inflation, and the issues of crime and chaos running rampant in our streets. Time is up, Mr. Speaker. It's time for the NDP Liberals to end the cover-up and corruption and provide the documents so Parliament can get working for Canadians. Thank you.
Thank you, buddy. The honourable member from Cypress Hill, Grasslands.
Mr. Speaker, after 9 years of this NDP Liberal Prime Minister, taxes are up, costs are up, crime is up, and time is up.
Yo, Trev, nobody's forcing you to watch, buddy. You can go you can go wherever you want. The internet's an open place.
Thankfully, time is up on his carbon taxes. We just received further confirmation that the carbon tax does blow a huge hole in the wallet of Canadians. The government's own budget watchdog said that in Saskatchewan, the average family will be robbed of over $2,000 every single year once the Prime Minister finishes increasing the carbon tax. That's $2,000 that could be used for food, for heating, for other essentials. And all this for what? The radical socialist environment minister publicly said that his own department doesn't even track whether or not the carbon tax reduces emissions. It is clear more than ever it is time to axe the tax. Since the Prime Minister refuses to do what is right, Canadians are demanding a carbon tax election. They can take comfort in knowing that Conservatives will axe the tax once and for all.
The honourable member from Davenport.
Mr. Speaker, good news. On Tuesday, October 15, the day after Thanksgiving, the residents in my constituency of Davenport will be giving thanks when they look in their bank accounts and see their quarterly Canada carbon rebate amount of $280 for a family of 4 or $140 for individuals. Canadians expect their federal government to take ambitious action on climate change, and thanks to the Canada carbon rebate and our climate plan, we are now on track to reach our climate goals for the first time in Canadian history. We have reduced our emissions by 8%, and Canada's 2024 National Inventory Report shows that Canada is on track to meet our emission reduction goals for 2026 and also on track for our 2030 targets. While the Conservatives are focused on empty slogans and want to rip up the carbon rebates, our government is focused on growing our economy, bringing inflation down, and making life more affordable for Canadians. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from New Westminster, Burnaby.
I rise today on World Mental Health Day to acknowledge a sobering reality. In any given year, 1 in 5 Canadians experiences mental health issues. Federal public safety employees who operate in a high-stress, unpredictable environment often work at great risk to their own mental health. That's why I tabled Bill C-357, an act aimed at creating presumptive mental health injury coverage for all federal public safety employees. This bill is a response to the long-standing call from the Union of Safety and Justice Employees to ensure that all federal public safety personnel have access to workers' compensation for mental health-related injuries. My bill seeks to rectify the current inequitable system that leaves federal government employees' benefits and entitlements dependent on the province in which they reside. Public safety employees work tirelessly to keep Canadians safe. It is our duty as MPs to help keep them safe as well by passing this bill. On this World Mental Health Day, let us commit to ensuring mental health supports for all. We stand with our dedicated public safety employees.
Hear, hear.
The Honourable Member for Berthier-Maskinongé. On Friday, October 11th, we celebrate World Egg Day. Eggs are a nutritious food produced by local farmers who are exceptional both for the quality of their production and the solidarity of their chosen marketing system, namely supply management. We've been waiting since June 2023 for the Senate to pass legislation to protect this supply management, and it's about time. An egg is a tasty food that can be enjoyed in many different ways. Supply management is essential to the economic vitality of our regions and to maintaining family businesses. They go hand in hand. Can anyone explain this to the few senators who don't care? There are over 200 supply managed producers on the Hill today from all over Canada, and they're asking the law to be respected and sanctioned. Let's show some respect for our producers. The Senate must deliver, and why not earliest tomorrow on World Egg Day.
The Honourable Member for Cumberland Colchester.
After 9 years of NDP Liberals, taxes are up, costs are up, crime is up, and time is up. We've heard it 1,000 times before from Canadians in all walks of life, at the doors and in our communities. But today, the Parliamentary Budget Officer has confirmed what we've known all along, that the carbon tax has been taking more away from Canadians than what they get back through rebates. Nova Scotians are going to be paying a whopping $1,215 more after the NDP Liberal quadruples the carbon tax. For Canadians, this makes all the difference in the world. Canadians are out there, Nova Scotians are trying to put food on the table, gas in their cars, and a roof over their head, all at a time when they're worried about putting heating fuel in their homes for winter. All 10 provinces are now opposed to the crushing carbon tax. It's time for the Prime Minister to show some courage and call a carbon tax election. Will the Prime Minister call an election today?
We need a strong voice that will not only stand up for Canadians, but that is able to negotiate deals with international leaders. We need somebody that can be composed the entire time and not lash out and freak out like Jagmeet does.
To correctional services workers, the USJE represents over 19,000 safety and justice employees across Canada. Like first responders, their exposure to traumatic events and graphic materials can have lasting impacts on them and their families. The pins we are wearing today are...
Oh, Trudeau has been on vacation all week using taxpayers' money. It's actually quite funny. The Liberals think they're for Canadians. They want to talk about this slush fund and the $400 million plus that are gone. The taxpayer $400 million. And Trudeau using taxpayers' money to fuck off and go on a nice week-long vacation.
Questions orales, oral questions.
Question period has begun. Ladies and gentlemen, here we go.
After 9 years of this Liberal Prime Minister, Canada has experienced a shocking rise in anti-Semitism and an increase in hate crimes of 165%. His divisive politics, where he pits one group of Canadians against another, only makes matters worse. It also doesn't help that he takes years to list terrorist groups to the list of banned organizations, allowing them to fundraise and recruit here in Canada. This one should be easy, though. The Houthis are attacking civilian ships and innocent civilians. Our allies have already banned them. So will the government do the right thing and list this group as a terrorist organization today?
The Honourable Minister of Justice and Attorney General.
Mr. Speaker, we unequivocally condemn the acts we saw in Vancouver that were launched by Sami Doon. Acts like burning the flag, chanting death to Canada, acts like denying the events of October 7th and celebrating terrorism are unacceptable in this country. With respect to Sami Doon, we heard the Minister of Public Safety reference this yesterday. We've asked for an expedited review because decisions of this importance are always made on the advice of national security agencies.
When I said standing up to international leaders, I meant for trade deals and stuff like that. That's very important. We're losing a lot of our jobs right now because of that.
Scheme. A new report from the Parliamentary Budget Officer shows yet again that Canadians are worse off under this tax. Here's what the total bill will be when the NDP Liberals finish quadrupling this tax. It'll cost people in Ontario $1,400, $1,500 in Newfoundland, and a whopping $2,000 in Saskatchewan. Canadians are already struggling with higher costs, higher groceries, and higher mortgage rates. The last thing they need is another bill from a useless carbon tax. If the government's so sure that Canadians support the tax, why not let the people decide in a carbon tax election?
The Honourable Minister of the Environment and Climate Change.
Mr. Speaker, let me read you the first paragraph of the PBO's report. And I quote, considering only the fiscal impact of federal fuel charge, PBO estimates that average household in each of the backstop provinces in 2030-31 will see a net gain, receiving more from the Canada Carbon Rebate than the total amount they pay in federal fuel charge and related GST, Mr. Speaker. The Leader of the Opposition should apologize to Canadians for misleading them all these months.
Colleagues on all sides, please, I'm going to ask you to not take the floor unless the Speaker recognizes you. The Honourable Member from Regina Capel.
The minister might want to read the rest of the report. Because in the quote he cited, he focused on a very key word, only the direct costs. When you factor in all the economic costs, it costs the Canadian household $1,400. Canadians are net losers under this carbon tax scheme, and this minister knows it. So, if he's so sure that Canadians want this government to keep quadrupling the tax, why not let the people decide in a carbon tax election?
The Honourable Minister for the Environment and Climate Change.
Let me read you another paragraph from the report, Mr. Speaker. Moreover, in 2030-31, for all backstop provinces, we estimate that the average household in each income quintile will see a net gain, except for average household in the highest income quintile, Mr. Speaker. You know what the Leader of the Opposition is doing? He wants to take money away from the middle class and poorer Canadians to protect his rich CEO friends. That's what he's doing, Mr. Speaker.
I was just thinking that. Pierre's not even here today. Scheer is taking over.
The minister is trying very hard to get Canadians not to understand the details. But the details are, and the facts are, that the Parliamentary Budget Officer confirmed what Canadians already know. They're being robbed by a carbon tax, which is driving up the cost of groceries, of gas, and everyday essentials. In fact, a family in Prince Edward Island will pay almost $1,200 a year when the NDP Liberals quadruple the carbon tax. Canadians don't support the carbon tax. We know 10 provinces don't support the carbon tax. Will the Prime Minister listen to Canadians and call a carbon tax election?
The Honourable Minister for the Environment and Climate Change.
The member talks about the agricultural sector. Well, let's talk about the climate impacts on the agricultural sector, Mr. Speaker. Droughts in 2021 resulted in 27% decline in Canada's grain production. Over the last decade, over 200 Canadian farmers have experienced cost increases and revenue loss from climate impacts, Mr. Speaker. This member and this party never talks about the impacts of climate change on farmers, on the price of food in Canada. They want to try and make us believe that climate change isn't happening. It is happening, and on this side of the House, we're here for Canadians, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Foothills.
The minister is either living in denial or purposely misleading Canadians, because the Parliamentary Budget Officer's report is clear. It costs Canadians more to pay the carbon tax than what they get back in rebates. But if the minister doesn't believe me, I would encourage him to read the Parliamentary Budget report. But in the essence of time, let me help out.
Pierre and Jagmeet are just... There's a boxing match going on in the fucking parking lot.
But again, if the minister is so confident that Canadians support this carbon tax, why are they so afraid to call a carbon tax election?
Oh, that actually made me laugh so hard. My God.
Indirect costs, Mr. Speaker. Let's talk about indirect costs.
If you guys are new here, make sure you hit that like button, hit that sub button. We are currently listening to the joke that is the Minister of the Environment speak about the fucking carbon tax rebate.
And to fight climate change, it's time for the Conservative Party of Canada to come on board, Mr. Speaker.
Alors. Order.
Oh, Greg is laying the smackdown early into question period here. Pierre is not here. Trudeau is still on vacation. And is Jagmeet missing in action again?
In the Bloc Québécois, we've been asking for years for the Senate to be abolished. It's an outdated institution that is completely undemocratic. We said that it was useless, but we were wrong. It's not useless, it's actively harmful. The Senate doesn't seem to care at all about the will of the people. Senators can go against it without any issue or consequences. Bill C-282 has received support from all parties in this House, but 2 unelected Liberal senators are blocking it, which is undemocratic. What are the...
Yeah, climate change, aka the weather.
line? The Honourable Minister of Agriculture and Agri-Food.
Monsieur le Président. Once again today, I was so pleased to be at a rally supporting supply management, today with my colleagues on the Hill. It's important to note, Mr. Speaker, that supply management was initiated by a Liberal government just over 50 years ago. Then we supported supply management. Today we support supply management. Being a dairy farmer in Prince Edward Island, I'm fully aware of the values of supply management, and I urge the Senate to pass Bill 282. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Salaberry-sur-Roi. Supply management is an agricultural model which will protect the future of our dairy, eggs, and poultry producers. We need to protect it. We all seem to agree on that. Everyone except for Senators Beam and Harder, who seem to think that they're smarter than everyone else here in this House, smarter than farmers, and smarter than the millions of our fellow citizens who elected us. They seem to think they're hot stuff, part of the global intellectual elite. When will this government bring them back into line, these 2 liberal geniuses who are blocking our democracy? The Honourable Minister of National Revenue. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Once again, my colleague knows very well that we stand with them to support our dairy, poultry, and egg producers. We support the supply managed sector. We will continue to support it. We have made that commitment. We will not be giving up market share. But can you imagine if there had been a conservative government in power when we were negotiating with President Trump at the time? Where would our supply managed system be today, Mr. Speaker?
The Honourable Member from Burnaby South.
Get this, a new study recently released shows that 94% of Canadians are worried about the high cost of groceries. And with Thanksgiving coming around the corner, they're worried that greedy CEOs are going to rip them off when they go grocery shopping. Now, I get why the Conservatives voted against our plan to lower grocery prices. Their chief strategist is a chief lobbyist for none other than Loblaws. But why did the Liberals vote against making sure we lower prices for Canadians? Why did they let greedy CEOs rip off Canadians?
Once again, I'm just going to ask members, please, to keep their voices down so that the chair can hear the honourable member, and those who require translation also be able to hear the interpretation. The Honourable Minister for Innovation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Oh,
and
God,
I thought
brace.
the leader of the NDP would stand up and say thank you. Thank you to the Liberal government, Mr. Speaker. We have introduced the most comprehensive reform on competition in Canada's history. And I want to congratulate him for this contribution, Mr. Speaker. Today we'll have less concentration, we'll have more choice, and we will stabilize price in Canada. But more than that, Mr. Speaker, you should rejoice that now in Canada we have a grocery code of conduct, Mr. Speaker, that's going to help our farmers across Canada. That's going to help our small retailers. Mr. Canada, they should thank us to fight for Canadians every day.
L'honorable député de Burnaby.
The Honourable Member for Burnaby South.
Galen Weston speaking.
According to the Bank of Canada, people are increasingly having to use their credit card to pay for rent and groceries. Jennifer Smith from Toronto said to Radio-Canada, "It's scary. I end up choosing to skip some credit card payments, even if it affects my credit score, if it means that I can keep my home and feed my children. That's what life is like under the Liberal government. When will the Liberals finally wake up?"
And you were a part of that, Jagmeet. You've been a part of that government for a very long time. The coalition is very strong between you two until recently.
Should apologize, because the only person who stood up to Galen Weston in this House is the Liberal government, Mr. Speaker. When we asked all of the grocery CEOs to come to Ottawa to explain themselves. But I think the leader of the NDP should also be pleased, because not only have we improved the competition system in the country, we even included what he suggested, because we know that it's hard for Canadians these days. That is why every day we are fighting hard to help Canadians with grocery prices. We will help them, and we have offered food programs for you throughout the country.
The honourable member from Calgary Forest Lawn.
After 9 years, taxes up, costs up, crimes up, time's up, Canadians are fed up. Right. New PBO reports, same results. Canadians pay more into the carbon tax scam than what they get back in phony rebates. An average Albertan family will pay nearly $2,000 in carbon taxes after this radical Liberal NDP government quadruples the carbon tax. That's why 10 provinces oppose the carbon tax scam. They know it's like the Prime Minister and not worth the cost. If they're so sure about this carbon tax scam, why not call a carbon tax election now so Canadians can decide to axe the tax for good?
That's right. Call it now. The Honourable Minister for the Environment and Climate Change.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think everyone in this House and Canadians watching should take everything this finance critic says about the economy with a big grain of salt, Mr. Speaker. It is this finance critics that told us if we paused our federal taxes, people in this province could save $1,000 without telling them that they'd have to drive from the North Pole to the South Pole, Mr. Speaker, to benefit from those wonderful savings. So I think we should all be very, very careful with what he says about the economy in this House, Mr. Speaker.
I don't even know what that was. That was a bunch of nothing that led to nothing and answered nothing. What the fuck?
Any lessons from that minister who let Jasper burn because of his incompetence? I'll send him over a copy of that PBO's report with some diagrams and some pictures so maybe he can understand, and flip over to page 19, table 3, that clearly shows a majority of Canadians pay more into this scam than what they get back in these phony rebates.
That's right.
2 million Canadians are going into a food bank in a single month. 1 in 4 Canadians are skipping meals because of their carbon tax scam. If they're so sure about this carbon tax scam, let's go to a carbon tax election now so Canadians can kick this costly carbon tax coalition to the curb for good.
That's it. Call it. The Honourable Minister for Families, Children and Social Development.
Mr. Speaker, we all suffer when we see that there are folks in our community that are struggling. And there is more work to be done, which is exactly why on this side of the House we continue to fight for Canadians, to fight for high-quality childcare, to fight for the Canada Child Benefit, to fight for the environment and the carbon rebate, Mr. Speaker. But let's not kid ourselves. We know that these programs that Canadians rely on would be in danger.
Actually, no, he's not suffering. It's funny you mention that, Dave, because the other day he said, the price of turkeys in my area are pretty low and you should come over to my house for Thanksgiving. So take his words for what he says.
Families in Ontario will be paying more than $1,400 a year in carbon taxes. This makes everything more expensive: gas, groceries, home heating. The NDP Liberal government and their carbon tax are not worth the cost. In fact, all 10 provinces are opposed to this costly coalition's carbon tax. So will the Prime Minister give Canadians what they want and call a carbon tax election?
Like, they are so completely out of touch with how much Canadians have been struggling.
Parliamentary Budget Officer's report of today, you will see that he further confirmed
once again, that 8 out of 10 Canadian families get more in the carbon rebate than they pay in the price on pollution. And Mr. Speaker, it was also clear from today's report that the economic cost of pollution is not being factored in. And that cost is $34 billion per year, Mr. Speaker. And that does not include the billions of dollars that disaster mitigation costs. Every time there's a disaster in this country, it costs Canadian taxpayers.
Question period should be just a lineup of Canadians walking into the House and asking real questions. And then both sides actually have to answer. It shouldn't be whatever this bullshit is.
From Lambton, Kent, Middlesex.
Well, once again, Liberal logic is on display and their math doesn't add up. It seems the Liberals have a hard time with basic concepts like, you know, reality or how money works. So let me make this really simple. Table 3 on page 19 of the PBO report shows what the cost of the carbon tax is. And I can send the minister a copy. The PBO says Canadians are paying more in carbon tax and GST on top of the carbon tax than they get back in rebates. And the reality is people have less money to pay for food, fuel, and home heating. Enough is enough. Will the Prime Minister call a carbon tax election?
The Honourable Minister for Public Services and Procurement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Enough is enough. 300 economists have said it. The pay rich more, the rich pay more, middle-class Canadians pay less. Everyone gets the same rebate. The rich pay more than they receive. Middle-class Canadians receive more than they pay. It's that simple, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Charles-le-Bourg-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is scoffing at your authority and the authority of this House. More than $400 million in taxpayer money was handed off to Liberal buddies, and the Prime Minister is still refusing to give evidence to the RCMP. He's obstructing justice. Canadians know very well that someone with nothing to hide would be happy to cooperate with the police. So who will have the courage to rise in this House and answer why? The Honourable Government House Leader. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What the member has said is false.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm here to say something that is completely irrelevant and just say that my opposition is false.
And the motion was very clear. It was clearly stated that it was an abuse of the power of this place, and because of that we should refer the matter to committee. We respect police authority here, so why don't the Conservatives? The Honourable Member. So, Mr. Speaker, if I understand correctly, the Government House Leader just said that you and we are engaged in abuse of power. But I think your ruling was quite clear, and that's why Parliament's work is blocked. The Prime Minister and his government are refusing to provide documents on this $400 million taxpayer scandal. Meanwhile, there are many difficulties in Canada. People are struggling, but this government isn't doing anything because this government doesn't want to listen to your ruling. Why? The Honourable Minister of Public Services and Procurement. Why? Mr. Speaker, because this is not a banana republic. In Canada, it is not politics.
It's kind of feeling like a banana republic.
Contrary, it's the opposite. And in this case, the RCMP has clearly stated that it does not want these documents because it might be risky to use them and it might actually sabotage their inquiry. If these Conservatives, with their banana republic policies, were to insist on giving the documents, it might undermine the inquiry. The Honourable Member for Berthier-Masquis-Langer. Mr. Speaker, this morning farmers came from all over to Ottawa, from Quebec, Ontario, Saskatchewan, the Northwest Territories, all over the place. They all came to show their support for Bill C-282. There were also representatives of all of the parties present, the Greens, NDP, Conservatives, Liberals. They were all there to show solidarity for this Bloc Québécois bill, which has become this entire Parliament's bill. Everyone except for Mr. Hart or Mr. Beam, two appointed senators who have decided to start a crusade against our farmers. Who is going to finally bring them into line? The Honourable Minister of National Revenue. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Once again, we completely agree with our colleague from the Bloc Québécois. We support the supply managed system. And we are asking the senators to show diligence. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The honourable member for Berthier-Masquinongé. Well, there were even some senators there this morning to apologize for the Senate's behavior, as they should, because there are two senators, Harder and Beam, appointed by the Prime Minister, not elected, who are sabotaging our democratic process. These two senators care more about what big lobbyists want than what Canadians at large want. So if we don't do anything about this, we'll be letting democracy be flouted under our noses. What is the government going to do to ensure that this bill, which has been adopted by a majority of members in the House of Commons, what is it going to do to get it out of the Senate? The Honourable Minister. Thank you. Once again, Mr. Speaker, we support the supply management system. We will enable it to continue to flourish. It's important for our regions and our economy. We have been asking the senators to act diligently. We have been asking that with great vigor because the Senate should recognize that the great majority in this House wants this bill to move forward. The honourable member for Berthier-Masquinongé. Senator Beam said that he cannot study this bill about supply management because in case we hadn't heard about it, there are some wars going on right now. So he and Mr. Harder, apparently two future Nobel Peace Prize laureates, well, they're going to start by fixing the problem of war, and then perhaps they'll have time to bring their superior intelligence to the matter of supply management. These people really seem to think that they're quite something. Enough is enough. Will this government tell Mr. Harder and Mr. Beam to fall into line, and will they get Bill C-282 out of the Senate now? The Honourable Minister of National Revenue. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This Liberal government supports the supply management system. We have committed to make no further concessions. We have been clearly stating that the senators should act diligently, but these are independent senators. I think the Bloc Québécois understands that concept. Thank you.
The honourable member from Durham.
Mr. Speaker, today the Parliamentary Budget Officer confirmed once again that the carbon tax is costing Canadian families more than they're getting back in rebates. Once the NDP Liberals quadruple the carbon tax, as they intend to do, the average family in Ontario will pay an additional tax up to $1,400. Now, to Liberal elites, that might not sound like a lot of money. The Prime Minister could probably find $1,400 in between his couch cushions. But to the average Canadian family, that's quite a lot of money. So when are we going to get the carbon tax election Canadians desperately deserve?
That's a good question. The Honourable Minister for the Environment and Climate Change.
Let me read again, Mr. Speaker, from the Parliament Budget Officer's report, and I quote, The general consensus amongst economists is that explicit carbon pricing is the most effective approach to reducing greenhouse gas emissions. The Conservative Party of Canada has no plan to fight climate change. The Conservative Party of Canada has no plan to adapt to the massive impacts of climate change that are costing Canadians tens of billions of dollars, Mr. Speaker. The Conservative Party of Canada has no plan for the economy. The Conservative Party of Canada has nothing to say about this conversation, Mr. Speaker.
And who pays those economists that give you that information?
To talk about civility and decorum. And in the interest of civility and decorum, I'd like to invite the Minister to Table 3. Table 3 on page 19 of the PBO report, which details the overall cost of the carbon tax. Maybe when the Environmental Minister actually reviews the report and Table 3 on page 19, he might agree with me and most other Canadians that we need a carbon tax election now. So will the Minister review the table, come back to us and say when we're going to get an election that Canadians deserve? Thank you.
Man, this guy is always incredibly well-spoken, and he delivers his speeches perfectly.
Mr. Speaker, well,
would not want to debate that guy.
I think Canadians would like to understand what the Conservatives plan to cut. And he talks about families in Ontario. Well, they refuse to talk about the Canada Child Benefit that puts thousands of dollars in the pockets of Canadian families every single year. They refuse to talk about childcare that saves Canadian families thousands of dollars every year. And when they talk about the price on pollution, Mr. Speaker, they conveniently omit the fact that Canadian families get more money back than they put in. Mr. Speaker, they want to put their hands in the pockets of Canadians and take that money away. Thank you.
Good answer.
The Honourable Member from Northumberland, Peterborough South.
Mr. Speaker, Statistics Canada confirmed today
what millions of Canadians already know. While the rich are getting richer, the most vulnerable are falling further and further behind. Today, Stats Canada reported that the gap between the 40% top earners and the 40% bottom earners grew by nearly 50%. They reported that the income inequity has never been higher in our country. Wow. This government has a choice. Will they continue their agenda in causing misery across our country, or will they finally call a carbon tax election?
The Honourable Minister for Families, Children and Social Development.
Mr. Speaker, I recently got to meet with a young mom named Madeline from my community who shared with me how important the Canada Child Benefit has been to her young family in these early days. The Conservatives have made their position very clear, Mr. Speaker. They would cut the Canada Child Benefit and leave the 4.3 million mums across this country, like Madeline, without the support that they need. That is what Conservative cuts look like, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Rosemont-la-Petite-Patrie. Mr. Speaker, when the NDP gets to work, the results are clear. Thanks to NDP pressure, Premier Legault backtracked on his decision to not offer dental care to Quebecers. Now, the Liberals, we remember the Prime Minister's promises: more doctors, more nurses, a better working public health care system for everyone. 9 years later, 500,000 Quebecers don't have a family doctor. Broken promises from the Liberals, and people are paying the price. When will the Liberals get to work to make sure that everyone has a family doctor? The Honourable Minister of Public Services and Procurement. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank and congratulate my colleague from the NDP from Montreal, as well as all members of the NDP, for their support for the Canada Dental Care Plan. It's made a major difference for Quebecers. There are 800,000 Quebec seniors who now have a Canada Dental Care Plan card, and 250,000 of them for the first time in many years, in many cases, have had access to affordable dental care. It's thanks to great cooperation with great results for Quebecers, even if the Conservatives claim this program doesn't exist.
Westminster Burnaby would please not take the floor unless recognized by the House. The Honourable Member from Churchill, Kiwatinuk-Aski.
Mr. Speaker, this week Canada's lawyers argued in federal court that First Nations leaders are showing a, quote, lack of maturity in their fight for clean drinking water. A lack of maturity. This language is unbelievable. It is deeply offensive, paternalistic, and discriminatory. Let's be clear, the lack of clean drinking water on reserve didn't just happen. It is the result of decades of neglect from Conservatives and Liberals towards First Nations. So will the Prime Minister apologize on behalf of his lawyers for this deeply offensive language? Will he call off his lawyers, stop fighting Shamattawa and Tatasqueak, and deliver clean water now?
Hear, hear. The Honourable Minister for Indigenous Services.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I just met with the Chief from Tatasqueak just a few hours ago, and we talked about the importance of Bill C-61, the work that Tatasqueak and the other communities have done on this legislation to ensure that we never go back to a time where well over 145 communities were suffering through long-term boil water advisories. That's the work that this government will continue to do in partnership with First Nations leaders. And I hope that the NDP will see that this is important legislation that needs to get through this House and that will have their full support.
The Honourable Member from Aurora Oak Ridges, Richmond Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Climate change is an issue that affects us all, and small businesses are not immune to the devastating effects of a changing climate. Small businesses in my riding of Aurora, Oak Ridges, Richmond Hill, like Windfall Ecology, have been contributing to the fight against climate change through the services they provide, the Price on Pollution program, and so much more. Can the Minister of Small Business tell Canadians about the measures our government has put in place to help all small businesses as they deal with the impacts of a changing climate and the fight against it?
The Honourable Minister for Small Businesses.
Speaker, and I want to thank my honourable colleague for that question. As a former small business entrepreneur myself, I understand the importance of affordability, which is why our government is delivering $2.5 billion to close to 600,000 small and medium-sized enterprises by the end of the year through the Canada Carbon Rebate. And as I mentioned already, we've negotiated agreements with both Visa and MasterCard to reduce their interchange fees by up to 27%. This is real, tangible difference that's going to help small business across this country. So we're going to continue to fight climate change while supporting small businesses. And happy Small Business Month, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Bay of Quinte.
Mr. Speaker, in the $400 million corruption scandal, which is the Green Slush Fund, you, Mr. Speaker, ruled that the Canadian people have the absolute right to demand the unredacted production of documents be given to the police. But this government refuses Parliament's absolute authority. Shame. Parliament is the people, and the absolute authority of Parliament is like your mom checking your room after you said you cleaned it.
I love how that guy just yells, shame.
One or two things, and the government may
just had to add in there.
Get off the hook, but Parliament is there to inspect and clean the House. Mr. Speaker, this is a messy House. When will this government clean it?
Oh, I don't know. It's been messy for a while there, buddy. Like, we gotta quit lying to ourselves here.
Speaker, as I've said, the government has handed over thousands of pages of documents. However, the big issue here that I think Canadians are concerned about is that they know...
Can we get a microphone boost for her whenever she speaks? Like, why is she always the most quiet individual ever? Not like I really want to hear what she has to say, but if she's going to speak, at least, you know...
The police should investigate something.
Like, come on.
We have no problem with police investigations. In fact, of course, any government would respond to them. And I would expect that any government of any stripe would react the same way we are today. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Bay of Quinte.
Mr. Speaker, the police have already opened an investigation. This is just Parliament asking for documents to be turned over. It's the ask and the absolute rule of Parliament, and this government's refusing. Just think of it like a business, right? This government forgets that in a business, they're the employee. The Canadian public are the owners. In the real world, if a business refused to, or employees refuse to hand over documents or hand over anything in investigation, those employees will be fired. Mr. Speaker, is this government just waiting to be fired by the Canadian public, or will they hand over the documents?
The honourable leader of the government in the House of Commons.
Mr. Speaker, in the real world, police have to request warrants. They have to go through due process to get information. It's not up to parliamentarians and politicians to direct police because they have a political vendetta. Mr. Speaker, Canadians expect due process, and they expect that politicians are here to protect their rights, not to get rid of their rights.
And I kind of also expect when the House gives a lawful order to produce these documents that, you know, the government should do so. But here we are 8+ days later now, and they're still talking about this $400 million+ of taxpayer money that is fucking just vanished.
Slush fund documents over to the RCMP criminal investigation. Obstruction of justice is the Liberals' middle name. They refuse to turn over documents in the SNC scandal, in the We Charity scandal, in the Winnipeg Lab scandal, in the foreign interference scandal. Just end the corruption cover-up and turn the documents over to the RCMP. How bad is it?
The Honourable Minister of Justice and Attorney General.
Mr. Speaker, every Canadian watching right now wants parliamentarians to do their job. The job of the opposition is to hold the government to account. The job of the opposition is not to direct the police. You don't need to take my word for it, Mr. Speaker. How about we hear from the Commissioner of the RCMP?
He's only got testicular fortitude when it comes to Poilievre and the Conservatives, but when it comes to basically everybody else, they got free range to pretty much do and say what they want. It's, double-sided, two-faced Greg at his finest.
We agree with the RCMP. It's time these guys start listening to the cops.
The honourable member from South Shore, St. Margaret's.
The Liberals blacked out so much in the documents that the Prime Minister's office ran out of toner for their copiers. So apparently it's okay to turn blacked out documents that hide Liberal corruption over to the RCMP. That's not a constitutional issue, but it is a constitutional issue to remove the redactions and expose the Liberal corruption. News for this minister, the Constitution does not exist to protect Liberals from criminal investigation. So will they just stop their cover-up addiction, and hand the unedited documents over to the RCMP?
The Honourable Leader of the Government in the House of Commons.
I have some grave concerns with what the member opposite said, beginning with the fact that I assume he's actually not seen those documents, so I'm not sure what he's talking about there, because the documents have been handed over. But what's of greater concern, and it was the RCMP who said it themselves, is that the way that the Conservatives are acting would actually compromise any police investigation, because the evidence would not be considered. So what is of concern is that they're
But aren't the Liberals technically compromising a police investigation by not producing the documents that were asked for under a lawful order? I still find this mind-blowing. They were asked for under a lawful order, and they still have failed to produce them. Oh my god, she still looks just as tired as she did 3 days ago. Maybe the Bloc should give her a day off to just sleep or something.
79% support. You know, it's hard to be more popular than that. All seniors are asking that they stop being divided into two classes of citizens. And people of all ages are calling for this, even some of the youngest. Even the House stopped bickering for 2 minutes to call for it. The Liberals are all alone on this. Why are they so keen to deny income to 1 million Quebecers? The Honourable Minister of Labour and Seniors. Mr. Speaker, it's very interesting to hear my colleague talk about seniors aged 65 to 74 when we know that that member and her party, the Bloc Québécois, acted together with the Conservatives to oppose the lowering of the retirement age from 67 to 65. Today, they're talking about 65 years, but not too long ago, Mr. Speaker, the Bloc Québécois wanted people to retire at 67. The Honourable Member for Shefford. Honestly, you have to wonder why the Liberals want a fourth mandate when their vision for the future of society seems to be to deny income to 1 million Quebec seniors. They're completely disconnected and people can see it. And we've been very clear, the Liberals have until October 29th to pass C-319 and increase pension for seniors aged 65 to 74. Time's going quickly, especially since the Senate doesn't seem to be in any hurry these days. Why is it so important for the Liberals to go to the polls over this lack of consideration for seniors? The Honourable Minister of Labour and Seniors. Mr. Speaker, we could put more credibility into the words of the Sovereignist Party across the way if they hadn't openly acted aggressively to oppose hundreds and hundreds of dollars in dental care for each and every senior who needs it, not just in Quebec, but across Canada. Including, Mr. Speaker, 14,000 seniors in her own riding. Mr. Speaker, there's no coherence here. The Honourable Member for Lévis-Lotbinière. Mr. Speaker, you decided that the NDP Liberal government violated an order of this House by refusing to provide evidence to the police for a criminal investigation into this $400 million Liberal scandal. Mr. Speaker, the Liberals' refusal to provide these documents is an insult to the intelligence of Canadians. Will the Liberals stop playing hide-and-seek, provide the evidence to the police so that Parliament can do its work with transparency and get back to work for all Canadians? The Honourable Minister of Innovation. Mr. Speaker, I think that Canadians should be truly concerned by this, because what we're seeing today and what we've seen in recent days, Mr. Speaker, is very concerning. The Conservative Party wants to direct the police, Mr. Speaker. Imagine in what state we would be if the Conservative Party, with the Conservative leader, imagine this, wanted to direct the work of the RCMP, Mr. Speaker. The RCMP has been very clear. There's an important risk that the motion be seen as a way of getting around charter rights and due process. We are going to fight to preserve democracy. The Honourable Member for Lévis-Lotbinière. Mr. Speaker, Canadians are facing really tough times, but times have never been better for well-connected Liberal buddies. The Auditor General has shown major discrepancies at SDTC when it comes to funding small and medium-sized businesses. The noble goals of SDTC were tainted when its $1 billion budget was repurposed so that a certain few could line their pockets. Mr. Speaker, will the Liberals finally give Canadians the transparency that they deserve? The Honourable Minister of Innovation. Mr. Speaker, people who are watching us at home and those who are in the galleries today understand the Conservatives' games very well. The game the Conservatives are playing, Mr. Speaker, is to try to direct police in Canada. Imagine where that'll lead us, Mr. Speaker. I challenge my colleague. 87% of the businesses in clean tech in Canada got funding from SDTC, Mr. Speaker. The truth is that this is a foundation that helped small businesses across the country. And I think, Mr. Speaker, the day that we let the Conservatives direct the work of the police, it would be a very concerning day for all of us. The Honourable Member for Beauce. Mr. Speaker, the House is paralysed because of another Liberal corruption scandal. It must be in their DNA. $400 million, 186 conflicts of interest at a time when Canadians can barely afford to feed, heat, and house themselves. But Liberal donors continue to line their pockets, and the Liberals are continuing to protect themselves and their buddies by hiding the documents. When will the government give the police the documents that they need and get back the $400 million of taxpayers' money that's disappeared? The Honourable Minister of Innovation. Mr. Speaker, what we've seen over the last few days is concerning for all Canadians. The reality of what we're seeing in the House is that the Conservatives are now trying to direct police services in this country. Mr. Speaker, in the history of Canada, what the Conservatives are trying to do is unprecedented. On this side of the House, we act responsibly. We have already provided the documents to the police, Mr. Speaker. There's been an Auditor General investigation. Documents have been provided, but what the Conservatives are trying to do right now is put a stain on democracy and prevent this House from working in the interest of all Canadians.
The Honourable Member from Buena Vista, Trinity.
Mr. Speaker, our government is taking real action to tackle the most pressing issues facing Canadians, and this includes climate change. Canadians know that climate change is making life more difficult and more expensive. We are a government that understands that
the carbon tax is making things more expensive. I don't know about the weather itself, but we can continue playing this game if you would like to.
Please tell Canadians how our government is supporting rural and remote communities right across the country.
The Honourable Minister for Indigenous Services and Fednor.
Mr. Speaker, as the Minister of Fednor and Indigenous Services Canada, I hear firsthand from rural communities hit hard by climate change. In fact, just yesterday, we heard from chiefs from Northwest Territories talk about the most severe drought they've ever seen in their lifetime. In fact, it's putting their livelihoods, their ability to gather food, their ability to get goods up and down that river at risk, Mr. Speaker. They know, and so many Canadians know, we must do more to protect the climate and each other. Conservative MPs don't care about that, though. They don't even believe in climate change, and they don't really care about affordability.
So, let me get this straight then. If there's a drought and they're not able to ship food up and down the river or supplies up and down, are you going to dump gallons of water into the river? You're going to take all that taxpayer money and refill the river?
Public Safety Minister was unwilling to explain why a CSIS warrant sat on the minister's desk for 54 days, when according to national security officials, such a warrant is typically signed off between 4 and 10 days. It has been reported that the subject of the warrant is a former Ontario Liberal cabinet minister. Does the minister really expect Canadians to believe that this 54-day delay had nothing to do with the partisan interests of the Liberal Party?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker,
it's ironic that the member opposite talks about political interest, because it was the Conservative leader, when he was the Minister of Democratic Institutions, said he wasn't going to take foreign interference seriously because it wasn't in his political interest to do so. On the other hand, on our side, this side of the House, we have taken the issues around foreign interference seriously since day one, including ensuring that we have protecting our democratic institutions, including the current...
Oh, but if you seed the clouds and then it over-rains and then it starts to flood, they'll blame that on climate change as well. And they'll be going, well, we didn't have enough funding from the climate change fund to stop the flooding. That's what they'll do.
Plausible explanation for the delay. It was about Liberals protecting Liberals. The Attorney General is responsible for seeing that Cabinet upholds the independent and non-partisan principles of our justice system. His Cabinet colleague put the partisan interests of the Liberal Party ahead of the administration of justice. What does the Attorney General have to say about that?
Hear, 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 hear. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, when it comes to foreign interference, this is not a new phenomenon, but what is new to Canadians is a government that actually takes it seriously. That is precisely why we have implemented a number of measures to ensure that our democratic institutions are strengthened, to ensure that it's not at the whim of the leader of the opposition when he thinks there's some sort of political advantage to him. Mr. Speaker, we will take the issues around foreign interference, no matter where they are coming from, incredibly seriously, and not cherry pick like the Conservatives do.
Hear, hear.
The Honourable Member from Calgary Heritage.
Mr. Speaker, Iranian-backed Houthis shoot down civilian merchant ships. They fire missile after missile at innocent Israelis. They disrupt international trade. They traffic in violence and fear across the Middle East. These terrorists can freely operate, fundraise, and recruit in Canada. The Americans banned them in January. NDP Liberals said they'd think about it. It's been 10 months. Ban the terrorists. Protect Canadians. What's there to think about?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Public Safety.
Once again, Mr. Speaker, we see that Conservatives want to play games with incredibly serious issues. We on this side of the House will not. What we will do, Mr. Speaker, is we will ensure that the national security agencies in this country who make regular terrorist listing determinations, that they have the resources they need to do just that.
These groups have been in the country for months now. Possibly even longer. And you're just gonna talk about, oh, we're gonna give them the necessary stuff they need to figure this out now. What do you... This is, the Liberal government at its finest, ladies and gentlemen.
It's a World Mental Health Day. This year's theme is time to prioritize mental health in the workplace. It reminds us that we need to prioritize mental health in all of our workplaces and communities right across the country. Everyone deserves to have access to mental health services that they need. Can the Minister of Mental Health and Addiction tell this House what our government is doing to extend access to mental health services across Canada? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Minister for Mental Health and Addictions.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to my colleague for all of her advocacy on mental health. It's such an important issue to Canadians. Today is World Mental Health Day, a day to raise awareness and commit to breaking the stigma around mental health. Mental health is health, Mr. Speaker, and we're committed to expanding access to mental health services for all Canadians. Mr. Speaker, we're taking action. While our government has solutions, the opposition only has slogans. From our government's work to creating a youth mental health fund to the 988 suicide helpline, we're taking a compassionate approach to make sure no one is left behind.
Hear, hear. The Honourable Member from Edmonton Strathcona.
Mr. Speaker, here are today's headlines. Israeli troops opened fire on UN peacekeepers in Lebanon. Hundreds of thousands of people are trapped in northern Gaza, ordered to flee with nowhere to go. Israel is planning to shut down UNRWA, and Canada's leader of the opposition says that Israel bombing a nuclear facility would be a gift to humanity. This is crazy. This is enough. Canada needs to do everything to de-escalate, everything to build peace. We need to sanction Netanyahu, we need to have an arms embargo, and we need to recognize Palestine.
Hear, hear. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, since October 7th, Canadians have been clear that they expect us to defend Israel's security and get the hostages released, ensure international rules are respected, do everything we can for civilians to be protected, and make sure that this conflict doesn't spread into a regional or international crisis. Too many innocent civilians, including children and women, have been killed in this war. The loss of innocent lives is something we have not heard Conservatives talk about in this House, and I appreciate the NDP bringing it forward. This should not be controversial, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Kitchener Centre.
Mr. Speaker, back in April, 6 nations of the Grand River had to close their community health centre because of worsening black mold, first detected over a year ago. And while Indigenous Services Canada has a responsibility to ensure 6 nations has a safe and accessible medical facility that meets their needs, the minister recently communicated to the community that they need to apply for funding and hope for the best. Will the minister take responsibility, commit to a follow-up meeting with 6 Nations Chief Hill, and expedite a new health centre?
The Honourable Minister for Indigenous Services and Fedno.
Mr. Speaker, I will always commit to working with First Nations leaders on their infrastructure priorities. As the member opposite knows, there is a $380 billion gap in infrastructure left after generation of neglect of First Nations communities. But we have increased spending on First Nations infrastructure priorities by 1,800%, Mr. Speaker. And we're going to continue to do that work. We're going to continue to be there as partners, as communities build up the infrastructure they need for today and tomorrow.
And so brings to an end of a question period.
Oh, boo-hoo. Okay, question period has come to an end, but we will see.
Dundas, South Glengarry, who's rising to give the weekly question.
The weekly question.
Speaker, it's an honour to rise on behalf of the official opposition for an important part that all look forward to on Thursday afternoon. That is the Thursday question. I think many Canadians are watching this. It's been 2 weeks today since your ruling that the Liberal government has been found in contempt of Parliament for refusing to turn over all documents pertaining to the $400 million Green Slush Fund. They have grinded Parliament to a halt by refusing to adhere to the will of Parliament and to your ruling. So we are watching with interest as they project the calendar for the next several sitting days, although we have a recess next week. Canadians want to know, perhaps in the last couple of hours, the Liberals have come to the sense and realized that they should provide and agree to provide the RCMP with full, unredacted access of all documents as ordered by Parliament so we can get back to business. Have they finally agreed to get back to work and get the RCMP the information they deserve to have?
The Honourable Leader of the Government in the House of Commons.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, here we are again. You'll remember at this time last week, I stood in this place and listed the following business for the upcoming week, specifically Bills C-71 on citizenship, C-66 on military justice, C-63 on online harms, and the Ways and Means motion related to capital gains. I'm sorry to say that all we have seen this week is more Conservative procedural games. I can only imagine because they don't want to debate this important legislation because they're opposed to it for Canadians. And again, for a second week in a row, they have offered nothing constructive and instead have focused on bringing dysfunction to this chamber. And as I've said many times, Mr. Speaker, the government is supportive of your ruling and the Conservative motion, actually, to refer the privilege matter to the Standing Committee on Procedures and House Affairs. But why can't they take yes for an answer, Mr. Speaker? They are effectively spinning their own obstruction because they don't want this matter to be referred to committee. And the funniest part about it is not only did they amend their own motion, but today they amended their own amendment. So they are trying really, really hard to avoid that this goes to committee for further study. And perhaps it's because what they will hear is expert after expert talking about the egregious abuse of power being displayed by the official opposition, their interference in police work, their obstruction of police investigation, and the fact that this is a complete disregard for democracy and the rights of Canadian citizens. They clearly don't want to debate government legislation. All they want to do is serve themselves and their own partisan interests. But, Mr. Speaker, we will continue to be here to work for Canadians, and let me take this opportunity, as I know
Let me take this opportunity to lie some more.
This weekend, to be together, to give thanks for what they have, to wish all members in this House, as well as all Canadians, a very happy Thanksgiving. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Colleagues, I wish to inform the House that the volume of earpieces will now be reset. Members using their earpiece at this time will have to readjust the volume.
I would like to inform the House that the volume of earpieces will now be...
Okay, so maybe there won't be a vote today because it is the Thanksgiving weekend and everybody seems to have just left, or not entirely sure what's going on here.
Orders of the day.
Orders of the day. Privilege. Resuming consideration of a motion respecting a failure to produce documents pertaining to Sustainable Development Technology Canada, and resuming debate on the sub-amendment of Mr. Muse.
Okay.
Resuming debate. The honourable member from Calgary Centre, before I interrupted him, he has 12 minutes and 50 seconds left on the clock.
Perhaps I misspoke there. I thought that I had a 10-minute speak, Mr. Speaker. I think I'm splitting my time with one of my colleagues here, but perhaps not. So I'll speak on for 12 minutes here, unless I'm reminded otherwise. But I've gone through a very extensive illustration of exactly how the corruption that has been part of this government since I've been in this government, since I've been in this Parliament for 6 years now. I guess it's 5 years, but at the end of the term here it'll be 6 years. But we've gone through ad scam. We've got, well, that was the previous Paul Martin government that fell for that, and recognize it fell over a $4 million scandal. Now, $4 million is a heck of a lot than a $400 million scandal. But the government fell in 2004, almost 20 years ago, over a $4 million scandal, where it was proven that the government had actually given money to companies where money was being funneled back to the Liberal Party. So giving money to insiders. And the Gomery Commission, at the end of the day, proved that that money, a lot of that money ended back up in the Liberal Party's hands. It was atrocious. Canadians punished the government for that and sent them packing, and sent in a new government in 2006 for good reason. Long in the tooth and effectively paying a lot of money for their friends. Now, the Gomery Commission obviously found enough information on $4 million worth of government graft, if you will, corruption, that it acted. It acted accordingly to the way it should have. But I've spoken about this, and I've spoken about the various other scandals that have happened in this government. SNC Lavalin, we've talked about that. That was in 2018. And what that did was effectively tarnish Canada's reputation on the international stage, because one of our, at the time, I think our largest engineering company was involved in corporate corruption around the world. That means that a lot of Canadian companies weren't able to bid on international contracts. That's a huge cost to the country. If you think about how many Canadian companies could not participate in international bids from international organizations because of one bad apple that was in the pockets of this Liberal government. And how do I know that? I know that because at the end of the day, you had the Prime Minister more or less throwing one of his ministers completely under the bus in order to get
not a shocker at all. Typical Justin Trudeau, just throwing whoever he can under the bus to make himself, or not to make himself look better, but to get himself out of any situation he doesn't want to be in.
To be, and ruled to be, corrupt. Should never have happened. The Winnipeg Labs, well, we know what happened in the Winnipeg Labs. The government ended up calling an election rather than facing the consequences in front of this House of an order to produce the documents that were from the leaks from the Winnipeg lab. Incidentally, that was in 2021 when a civil servant was at this bar in this House, Mr. Speaker, effectively saying, you know, I've got some privilege where I don't have to provide this. And your predecessor, Mr. Speaker, was ordering him. The government, what they did is they took your predecessor to court in order not to produce those documents. That's never been done before in Canadian history, where the government takes the Speaker, the representative of this Parliament, to court, weaponizing, legally weaponizing against this Parliament. Parliament is supreme. The government isn't supreme. This government answers to Parliament. This is our role here as elected officials, to oversee the government, not to just do what the government says. And you've been very good at that, Mr. Speaker, as far as making sure they're held to account. And I applaud your order here, getting them to actually produce these documents. Winnipeg Labs was one thing. Incidentally, I wanted to point out, 2024, the government actually produced 600 pages of documents regarding the leaks at the Winnipeg Microbiology Lab. Now that's 3 years later than they were asked for by this Parliament. But I want to really expose the lengths the government went to avoid that. They called an election. They called an election in order to dissolve Parliament so they wouldn't have to disclose what had happened and what they were complicit in allowing to happen at one of the National Microbiology Lab in Winnipeg. It was scandalous that they got away with this. We Charity, of course, I've gone into it in detail, but We Charity was once again senior members of the government working hand in hand with their friends, money going back and forth about who's getting paid for what. Wow. Lots of money going back to the Liberal pockets' hands. It was scandalous, and I will say as corrupt as anything I've seen in this government. And luckily we exposed that. And I recall it was one of my first years in Parliament, and I recall bringing some of my skill set to the fore at that point in time, because I was actually looking at their financial statements and looking at one year versus the other years, and looking at it and saying, these are not right. And actually looking at at that point in time as a charity that was actually hiding some information. An in-out scam, if there's ever was one. Arrive scam, we've gone through that in detail as well. Arrive scam was a lot of money going to two people working in the basement of their homes, money being shoveled out the door. Canadians know all about it. Again, we had him at the bar here in Parliament. We had somebody actually answering to parliamentarians about what was going on in his company and how he more or less used a lot of influence with his Liberal friends and his government friends in order to get a whole bunch of money shoveled into his bank accounts. This is corruption. This is lack of oversight. And I know that my colleagues on the other side of the House, the government side of the House, they're going, well, that's just incompetence from the government's part. Nothing to do with us here. It's just the government being incompetent. Don't tell us to be accountable. Government is supposed to be accountable. Every one of these ministers is supposed to be accountable for the departments. And the thing that was quite clear in the ruling that the Auditor General had here when they looked at the Green Slush Fund, which we're addressing here today, Mr. Speaker, was that the Minister of Industry did not oversee the contracts with the conflicted Liberal insiders at all. And I want everybody to address that here in the House of Commons. The Minister of Industry didn't oversee those contracts at all. And think about what I call the Minister of writing checks, because that's all he does. He thinks he's there to just bring in business to Canada and write billions of dollars worth of checks to all kinds of industries, many of which are long shot gambles, but this is the Canadian taxpayers' money that he's throwing out there without any accountability whatsoever. Not just accountability for the money, but accountability for the contracts, accountability for the people involved, accountability to make sure that we're getting value for money, even if the contract is a terrible contract. Does it measure up? The Minister of Industry is clearly not being accountable for that, and should be held to account in this House at the soonest possibility, Mr. Speaker. These are hundreds. This one here, let's get to the point. Hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars funneled to Liberals and Liberal friends through the green slush fund. And all of a sudden, we're asking for those documents. The Auditor General has found some malfeasance there. The documents come back, and they're completely redacted. As my friend, the member for South Shore St. Margaret said, he could have run out of toner in the Prime Minister's office. There was so much black ink on that page. But I've spoken to various scandals here.
So they brought the documents forward, but everything that would have probably exposed them, they redacted, they blocked it out. They are blocking the public from seeing what they are doing. This is the Liberal government at its fucking finest.
Criminal charges to be laid here, and we're being held up by this government. 3 years, like the Winnipeg microbiology lab, you're going to hold it up for 3 years to try and just shovel it under the rug. Nothing happened here. Well, 3 years down the road, well, something happened, but don't worry about it. It was so long ago, we don't need to worry about it anymore. That's not the way this Parliament works. We're asking for these documents. We're Parliament. We're asking these documents to be unredacted and provided to us so we can oversee these and make sure there's accountability built into them. But I'm going to ask this question as well. If this is criminal, is what's happening in this House right now a cover-up of criminality? So I'm asking the people on that side of the House, the people on the government benches.
What do you think, buddy? If you get the documents back and everything is blacked out and redacted, what do you think they're doing?
This is going to be looked at from the Canadian public, but also from the police. We tried to hide this evidence from Parliament, who legitimately and legally asked for this, and we decided, the government says, that we're not going to provide it in a first iteration since Confederation, where this government has repeatedly provided not enough information to this Parliament. COVID changed a lot, I admit, in this country. It wasn't supposed to change democracy or the way we handle democracy in this House of Commons. We are supposed to practice democracy as if this House of Commons holds the government accountable for their actions, especially their actions in spending Canadian taxpayer money. I've heard the House Leader, the Deputy House Leader, talk about the Charter. This is nonsense. The Charter was not designed, there's no foresight at all, to have the Charter interrupt Parliament's role in holding the government to account. That is completely made up. It is a fabrication and should not be entertained here at all. And if any official at the Department of Justice is putting that forward as an argument, put that name forward, because that person should be disbarred very quickly here and should not be practicing law in Canada, let alone for Her Majesty's government. This is, again, a ruse put forward by this government in order not to be accountable to this Parliament. This government needs to be accountable to this Parliament. Our job here, Her Majesty's loyal opposition, is to hold this government accountable, and it is doing its best to obfuscate, confuse, and try not to provide the information that's required for us to do our job here as His Majesty's loyal opposition. Mr. Speaker, I beseech you, can you please enforce this as much as you can, as you have done to this point in time. Continue to hold these people to account as we are here today. Continue to enforce your rules as the representative of Parliament, making sure that the rules in this House are upheld and this government is held to account for its abuse of taxpayer funds. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Question et commentaire. The honourable member from Hamilton Mountain.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I listened very carefully to my friend's speech, and I'm wondering if he saw the letter from the RCMP. I saw it for the first time today. I'm not sure when it comes, but as someone who covered criminal court for many years as a journalist, I have a lot of sympathy for the RCMP, who are saying even if they get these documents, which they don't want, they wouldn't be able to use them in a court of law because it doesn't follow the proper chain of
because you've redacted all the fucking information out of them and there's nothing they can take out of it to bring to the court of law? Is that what it is?
Independent, strictly adheres to the principle of police independence. In a free and democratic society, this ensures the government cannot direct or influence the actions of law enforcement. I'm wondering what the honourable member has to say in response to the RCMP.
The honourable member.
The RCMP that is bought and paid by your government.
Things the member said in that question. Number one, she saw that document today, and it's been commented on for 2 weeks here, and I wonder why she hasn't looked at it sooner. But we are not the government. We are not the government. We are Parliament. They are the government. The government is the front bench over on that side of the House. That front bench is not supposed to direct the RCMP. Our role as Parliament is to hold the government to account. We are asking the government, and we've asked it, and you've ruled on it, Mr. Speaker, they need to provide those documents to the RCMP for them to determine exactly what has gone wrong here and if it is criminal. I don't know why the member on the other side doesn't see that chain of events for them to see the evidence and them to determine if there's a criminal act that occurred in there and for them to investigate that at that point in time. The first step in that process is what we do here. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
So I typically don't go this long, but this actually has my full interest, so we're going to continue.
I remember a time in this country when there was something called the sponsorship scandal that really rocked the political world. That's the event that made me a conservative. It was a seminal event for a lot of young conservatives. At the time, all opposition parties were united to ensure that we could fend off this massive corruption scandal coming from the Liberal Party of Canada that eventually would bring down the...
Also, I might as well go longer because this most likely will be the last question period for like a week or so, I believe. I'm going to have to check the schedule, but there is a question period tomorrow, or maybe there isn't because of Thanksgiving. I'll have to check. I typically don't do question period on Friday anyway, so I'll do a extra long stream because there's no question period next week.
Corruption.
The honourable member from Calgary Centre.
I thank my colleague very much for the question. I did have reference to the sponsorship scandal in my speech, and I had to cut a couple pages of out to fit within the time allotted. But he's exactly right. It coalesced Canadians on how their government was actually working, and there weren't checks and balances on money going out the door from the Liberal government of the time and back in the back door of political contributions. It was obscene. It was absolutely obscene. From 1996 to 2004, there was a Gomery Commission that actually looked at how all that money was backdoored into the Liberal Party, money given to Liberal friends, backdoored into the Liberal Party. It was an awful demonstration of how a democratic country should run itself. And that government got thrown out. For $4 million at the end is the amount found by the Gomery Commission, as opposed to $400 million. Now, I appreciate inflation, but inflation over 20 years is not 100 times the scandal that happened in that year. This is something that we have to make sure we're holding the government accountable and make sure the public sees that we are doing our job and that the government is actually doing providing some transparency, some accountability for its actions. Thank you very much.
The honourable member for Abitibi Bay James Nunavik. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, with speeches that have been going on for days, it looks like we're going to be stuck here forever. Liberals and Conservatives are pointing the finger at each other and have been for days now. The STDC scandal represents a lack of control over public funds, waste, meddling, a scathing indictment of the federal system. The government needs to do the responsible thing and also allow the legislature to do its job. If you were in the government as Conservatives, what would you do to avoid something like this happening again?
Centre.
That's a very good question. I'd like to thank my colleague for that question. So thank you, Madam Speaker. If we form government, we will work with all stakeholders to ensure that all government spending...
And then they start doing it in French, and I'm kind of just like, well...
is transparent and accountable to the Canadian public. We need to shine a light on secret government information. Sunlight is the best disinfectant. Thank you.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm actually disappointed in the response the member gave to my colleague. I think it's illegitimate. I've been in opposition for over 20 years. And to try to say because you're in opposition, you have supreme power and to use that as a beating tool over constitution or charter rights, I think is shameful. The RCMP are very, very clear in terms of the game that the Conservative Party of Canada is playing. And I quote from the letter, "There is a significant risk that the motion could be interpreted as a circumvention of normal investigative processes and charter protections." This is not the government or the Liberal Party saying this. Madam Speaker, this is the RCMP institution, the commissioner. And then to say, well, it's not a charter issue and try to downplay that issue is disgraceful. Why won't the Conservative Party stop playing the game and realize that this is something that is serious and stop the filibuster and allow the issue to go to the Procedures and House Affairs Committee so we can start dealing with issues that Canadians are concerned about, not the games, the political games that the...
Not the $400 million plus that just randomly went into Trudeau's buddies' pockets. That seems like something Canadians should probably want to know more about.
Responding to my colleague again, and I know that sometimes I irritate him.
They just call it political games, but it's $400 million and possibly more of taxpayers' money.
To Parliament unredacted, and they refuse. This has been finally dealt with. So we are awaiting those documents. Please provide those documents, and we will love to get back to doing the work of Parliament and getting some relief for Canadians that this government has stressed so badly in this process. I'm looking forward to those documents and getting back to work for Canadians.
The Honourable Member. Thank you, Madam Speaker. During question period, the government gave answers stating that we can't provide the documents to the police, the RCMP, because the RCMP hasn't issued a warrant. But the only thing we are asking for is to provide some potential evidence. We're not trying to tell the RCMP how to do things. We're simply providing them with some potential evidence, and then the RCMP can do what it wants with them. The government also spoke about the division of powers. Well, look, we're not giving orders to the RCMP, nor do we want to. The division of powers is essential in any democracy. Here's my question. How is it that the government is not... how is it that the government doesn't realize this unless they're creating some smokescreen as part of their refusal to hand over unredacted documents? The Honourable Member for Calgary Centre. Thank you very much. To my colleague, I absolutely share her opinion. I believe it is indeed a government smokescreen. The government is certainly not telling the truth as they seek to avoid parliamentary scrutiny. I don't understand why they want to get away from a parliamentary order, because Parliament is essential to Canadian democracy. So I would say, please give the information to Parliament so we can hand it over to the RCMP. That is something very important in the role played by the opposition in the House of Commons. It's something vital. I would like to thank my colleague again for the question.
For Calgary Shepherd.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's a delight to see you in the chair. I was hoping that you would be the chair occupant during my intervention on this particular issue, because you and I share something in common, Madam Speaker. Maybe in my case, it was my formative years. I went to school, obviously, on the South Shore of Montreal. I grew up in Brossard. I believe you are the member for that region as well. You will know my elementary school.
Okay, buddy, stop fluffing up the speaker. Let's just get this going.
Whose wife was the director of the school, and I went there. But also, with something we share in common is we both survived the 1995 referendum, and you lived through the sponsorship scandal. And so that's where I want to begin, because those events, the 1995 referendum, the sponsorship scandal, made me a conservative. It convinced me that the Liberal Party of Canada was corrupt and would be infinitely corrupt into the future. And I remember the table talk with my parents, my friends, people that I knew, and that became kind of the common accepted wisdom that the Liberal Party of Canada would always be corrupt, and there was no way to save them. And I find myself now in this chamber here, privileged from the people in the riding of Calgary Shepherd who have sent me here to speak on their behalf, and it's happening all over again. This time, instead of the acronym being the sponsorship scandal, the Scandale des Commandites, like they said it in French, it is now the SDTC, or in French, le TDTC scandal. In this case, it's 8 times larger than the sponsorship scandal was. We're talking about up to close to $400 million that was corruptly awarded to friends of the Liberal Party. $400 million. Taxpayers work incredibly hard to earn a living in this country, to then pay their taxes, to then see it awarded corruptly. So there are 2 parts to my intervention today. The first part is to talk about the Speaker's ruling on this matter, and the second part is the contents of those documents that has led us to this moment, and on why the Liberal Party, the governing party, is blocking the work of Parliament. It's not allowing us to proceed, because this could all end if they would just release all the unredacted documents to the parliamentary law clerk. It ends right there. We trust the law clerk. I, in this situation, am fine with the RCMP looking at the documents. They have a statement they've put out. If they find nothing of value in the documents, the matter ends there. It's quite simple. There's no reason to hyperventilate and make up judicial opinions on the floor of the House of Commons, make up arguments on why the Charter or the Constitution shields the Liberal Party of Canada from having documents in its possession, in the government's possession, being released so we can see how bad is the corruption. The Auditor General has already said there was corruption. The Auditor General has already ruled on this, and the Speaker has ruled as well. And this House ordered these documents to be produced June 10th in a vote that was 174 to 148. No individual member of Parliament has the absolute right to obtain any document that he or she wants, but as a House, as a group of parliamentarians, a majority here represents a majority of the Canadian public, a majority of Canadian taxpayers. And the Canadian taxpayer has been defrauded, close to 400 million, 390 million exactly is the numbers in question. So in the Speaker's ruling, it said there, in some instances, only partial disclosures were made, owing either to redactions or the withholding of documents. That means entire documents were not provided. It goes on to say, in other instances, the House order was met with a complete refusal. Now, the Government of Canada, all of these cabinet ministers...
So this is past question period now. We are just listening to them debate over the SDTC scandal. I am going a little bit longer than I typically normally do. I'm probably going to end it soon, though. We will see what happens here.
Because this place, the majority of members of Parliament, approved the spending. The government exists because Parliament approves the spending. So we own these documents. These are ours. So when we request for them, when we call for them, when we demand them to be given to the law clerks, they have to give them to us. We want them. We're not saying give us all the documents across all of the government of Canada. We're saying specific to the SDTC, the Green Slush Fund scandal, to give us the documents. And the Liberals have basically continued blocking the work of Parliament because they refused to give them. There were documents that were redacted, and there were documents that were completely withheld. Now, in the early interventions that led to the Speaker's ruling, the member for Windsor West spoke. He argued that the order for the production of documents should be respected. The New Democrats were right, absolutely right in that. A Bloc member of Parliament from La Prairie contended that the government may well have reasons not to meet its obligations, but that the privileges of the House are well established and that the order was clear. And it was very clear to all of us when we voted on it. The time for debate was then. And at the time, the government House leaders should have made the arguments that are being made now by different Liberal Party members of Parliament and parliamentary secretaries, but they didn't make those arguments because I went through the record, and those are not the arguments that they were making. In the House procedures, the House of Commons Procedures and Practice, the 3rd edition confirms again that the procedural and constitutional understanding, and starts at page 985, is well understood by all of us. No statute or practice diminishes the fullness of that power rooted in House privileges unless there is an explicit legal provision to that effect or unless the House adopts a specific resolution limiting the power. The House has never set a limit on its power to order the production of papers. And the reason for that is simple. We own those papers on behalf of the people of Canada. That's who we're doing this work on behalf of. They have a right to see the documents. They have a right to see the documents sent to the law clerk and then given to the RCMP. And the RCMP can do whatever they want with it. The order of the House doesn't tell them what to do. It doesn't tell them what they should go and where the documents should be used or how they should be distributed within the RCMP. It is entirely up to them. Going back to the Speaker's ruling again, he said, the procedural precedents and authorities are abundantly clear. He goes on further. He stated in the debates at page 2043, referring to Speaker Milliken's ruling from April 2010, procedural authorities are categorical in repeatedly asserting the powers of the House in ordering the production of documents. No exceptions are made for any category of government documents. I do not understand why the government keeps insisting that Speaker Milliken was wrong. And I'll say this, Speaker Milliken, I think we can all agree, in the modern history of our Parliament, is probably the best Speaker we've ever had. Like, I will say that if you go through his rulings, wise Speaker indeed. And I'll say also, was a member of my political formation, still a wise Speaker, still a man I think many of us would lean on when it comes to procedures of the House. So I cannot believe that the government of Canada, the Liberal Party of Canada, is rejecting his own words that were said in this House on the production of documents. So on going beyond the House of Commons powers, which has been an argument the government House leader made, again the Speaker said, and he said with respect, that these concerns ought to have been raised prior to the motion's passage, to its adoption. The House has clearly ordered the production of certain documents, and that order has clearly not been fully complied with. The Chair cannot come to any other conclusion but to find that a prima facie question of privilege has been established. So he's basically said that the government is in contempt of an order of the House, in contempt of Parliament. It's simple. This all ends when they give all the documents to the law clerk. We're not saying give it to the official opposition leader. Don't give it to me. Give it to the law clerk of the House of Commons, appointed by the government. Like, it's very simple. Just give it to that person who will see the documents unredacted and then will transfer it to the RCMP. There is no great complications here. I think one of my favorite lines that I've heard in debate is, when someone breaks into your house, do you call the police or do you call a committee? I call the police. Those are the people I will go to when I have a problem. There's no committee that can fix a problem if someone's breaking in. There's almost $400 million at stake here from Canadian taxpayers. Canadian taxpayers were bilked out of this. And it's not that this is like a recent thing, Madam Speaker. It's not that this is something that just kind of came about and it was discovered later on. This started in 2017. SDTC has existed since 2001 and spent almost 16 years with a clean bill of health from the Auditor General. And then certain Liberal cabinet ministers began appointing their friends, and they appointed more of their friends. And those friends saw friends as companies that needed money. And they went to the taxpayer and they fleeced them. And then everything came apart, and then we had this bizarre kabuki theater where the minister abolished the fund, rolled it into somewhere else and said, it's all good, we're moving on, nothing to see here, it's such a terrible shame all this money went missing, $390 million of which. And now we should talk about, $1 billion per year was spent and there was no problems whatsoever, but then they just couldn't help themselves when they reached into the pockets of the taxpayer and gave their friends. So let's look at exactly what happened with SDTC. So it's the Auditor General's report that found that there were hundreds of millions of dollars that were not just misspent, but they were corruptly awarded to the companies, sometimes of board members making the decision at the board. You had 82% of the funding transactions approved by the board during a 5-year sample by the Auditor General were found to have conflicts of interest. 82% had a conflict of interest. I cannot imagine an instructor, a professor, a teacher out there who's teaching corporate ethics who would look at that and be like, that's okay, we should just roll things under the rug and just move on. Mistakes were made, not so bad. And this was an Auditor General 5-year sample. She did not even have the opportunity to look at all of the cases of all of the awarding of money. In the Auditor General's own report, she found that the same board approved $59 million in projects that they were not authorized to do so, because the SDTC is the Sustainable Development Technology Canada Fund. It was meant to fund green energy projects. And $59 million was approved to go to nothing related to the fund, so illegally given up. And I would hope that we will all agree that $59 million is a big sum of money. It's a huge sum of money. And the taxpayers have a right to know, where did the money go? Why were these decisions made? There were people on the board who were awarding each other's companies cash. That is an obvious conflict of interest. And there were Government of Canada officials who sat through those board meetings. So how could the minister claim that he could not have known about it? How is it possible that there are no documents out there that are worthy of giving over to the law clerks and then give to the RCMP for it to be determined and investigated how exactly these decisions were made? These were completely in contraventions of the Conflict of Interest Laws of Canada, the Public Office Holders Rules, and the SDTC's own act. I would think when you appoint people to a board that they would read the act that governs their behavior, but obviously that didn't happen in this case. 405 transactions, 226
I don't think he practiced it. He's reading it right off the paper, but yeah, he is kind of fucking going off right now. It's been a long, like, how long has he been talking for? My goodness. It's been almost 13 minutes. He's just been going off.
St. Margaret's brought this up, but Madam Speaker, do you know who was the lobbyist for a few years for Cycle Capital? Why? It was the...
To be fair, I am more used to question period where they just have like a minute and a half to say whatever they can as quickly as possible.
At that time, he was a paid lobbyist, so he had to register. That's how we know this is all public information. He lobbied for them, and when he was lobbying for Cycle Capital, the current Minister of Environment, that company got $111 million. Well, that's so fortunate for them. How lucky are they? There are documents over there which would then show which meetings were held, what documents were exchanged, what's talked about. There would be, I'm sure, diary notes from public servants in those meetings and how decisions were being made and what was being said. There's actually, in the Lobbying Act, I see here 25 times in the year before he was elected. That is quite surprising. I mean, I wonder when he became the nominated candidate for the Liberal Party of Canada. Others who have participated in this were told at different points that actually some projects were rejected because they did not meet the funding requirements. And they were told, actually in emails that we know because they were released by the whistleblower, by others at parliamentary committees, they were told, quote, they would help her find money from other government departments. And pretty soon after that, the former board chair's center, named after her, got $12 million from ACOA and the ISET program. So even in some situations where it's quite obvious that for conflict of interest reasons, a program could not get money, money wasn't given out through another fund. So 9 directors, according to the Auditor General, accounted for the 186 conflicts. 9 directors, 9 individuals appointed by...
Yeah, fentanyl it's been terrible. It has been coming up from the States like crazy. And about a week or so ago in a township nearby to me, somebody was arrested by the OPP for distributing fentanyl, and I believe they had like a ton of illegal firearms as well. So, like, this is the kind of shit that under the Liberal government, they've just kind of let it go. They've just kind of let it happen. And when they finally do find these people, they give them the lightest slap on the wrist sentence possible. Sometimes these criminals just get caught and released within the same week. So this is what we're dealing with now.
SDTC used to put out a quarterly report on every single company. And the new fund, whatever has been rolled into, it doesn't do that anymore. It's silent. It's hidden. There's no more information being given out. We're supposed to believe that it was only those 9 directors that were directly appointed by the government. In 2017, the government went out of its way. It replaced the board chair because he was inconvenient and appointed their own person into that particular role. And that person participated in some of that conflict of interest decisions, sometimes to give even her own company some of the taxpayers' own dollars when they shouldn't have at all. So this goes on and on and on and on. And like previous members have said and others have mentioned in this House, this is not the first time that the Government of Canada, the Liberal Cabinet, is refusing to disclose documents. Winnipeg Labs, they actually took the Speaker to court to stop the release of detailed documents from the Winnipeg National Microbiology Lab, and has gone through 2 parliamentary committees now to try to extract those documents. They even called an election to avoid having to release the documents. There was the SNC Lavalin scandal, which the Prime Minister claimed on live television during a press conference that there was nothing to see here and nothing was going on, and that proved to be untrue as well. There was the We Charity scandal, foreign interference campaigns. And again, in every single situation, at first the government refused to release the documents.
Well, that's just it. Is it really wind turbines and solar panels and whatever, battery plants, whatever they want to say it is? That's the thing. That's why it's scary when they didn't want to produce the documents under a lawful order, and now they have produced either some of the documents or most of them, and it's all redacted. All of the info is gone. What are they actually trying to hide?
I'd be afraid to cross it. If we are to believe the government's argument right now that for charter reasons, for constitutional reasons, they can't release the full documents that the Speaker has ordered released based on a majority vote in this place of all the MPs, and they're making a bridge out of it, I would not cross it. I would tell every single person in my riding of Calgary Shepherd, you cannot trust their words. If they've built that bridge out of the words, Madam Speaker, you cannot trust it. It is old Yiddish wisdom, and it applies right here. This all ends when they release all of the documents. It is really that simple. And then we can get back to the normal work of this House. There's actually, I believe, another point of privilege that's coming up after this involving another Randy and other Randy, I'm told.
Attack of the Randys.
Also trying to figure out what is there. In anticipation of a question I am very likely to get, I do want to remind the other side of 2 times the Prime Minister has commented.
Chris Ruth is back. Let's go.
Appealing criminal charges. One is from February 2018, said that the Prime Minister said the police investigation of Vice Admiral Mark Norman will inevitably lead to, quote, court processes. And then in another article on May 12, 2019, he said, he told reporters at a press conference that Norman's case will likely end up before the courts. That's a quote. And then he goes on in a 2018 town hall, he said that the case would inevitably...
Well, even when weed was illegal with air quotations, there were a bunch of storefronts and dispensaries, at least here in Ontario, that had no problem staying open 9 to 5 plus hours. Fucking selling it. No issue at all. They got shut down. A lot of them did get shut down, but they'd open up like a couple days later in a new building. Christ, they would even open up in townhouses, and there would be a security guard sitting on the front porch that would check your ID and let you in. A lot of these places, they somehow found a loophole in the system. So I don't know if Poilievre wants to make it illegal. I don't know how well that's going to work out. We'll see, though.
Dealing with this silliness of what we constantly hear from member after member. They continue to ignore the fact, and this is why I'm appealing to the member opposite. It would be a wonderful presentation. Go and make it at Proc. But to be able to say that as a Conservative member, you are not, or the member is not, Madam Speaker, going to listen to the advice of the Commissioner of the RCMP and the advice of the Auditor General of Canada is highly irresponsible, I would suggest, Madam Speaker. These are independent institutions. Why should Canadians believe the politically motivated games that we're seeing on the floor of the House of Commons in Ottawa, as opposed to listen to what the institutions of our RCMP and Auditor General are saying? Why does he believe he has more credibility than them on this?
And let's be real here. If you're near a res, you can pretty much just go there and get whatever the hell you want.
Organizations so independent, but it was that government that invoked the Emergencies Act that ordered police forces across Canada what to do and how to do it, removing the role of justices in issuing search warrants and warrants of any type. That's what the Emergencies Act did. They did that. When it came to the Auditor General, very early in their term, when the Auditor General asked for more money to do more audits, they refused to give the money. In fact, I remember a letter coming from a certain Liberal MP telling them they were wrong and they should keep funding that office. Those were decisions they made. They have no problems interfering in the work of officers of Parliament or the police forces when it suits their
Well, if you want my honest opinion, I don't think Pierre is focused on things like weed. He's more focused on things like the hardcore drugs, heroin, crack, cocaine, fentanyl, the stuff that is being given to people in the safe injection sites. That's what they're calling them. They're not safe at all, but that's what they're calling them. And those people are then taking those drugs and selling them to get harder drugs, and God knows who is getting their hands on this stuff. So that is what I believe he truly wants to shut down. But if he goes for dispensaries and shuts down weed dispensaries, then fuck, he does that too. At the end of the day, most people just want a good economy. People just want to be able to afford gas, food, a new home, whatever the case is. So it's kind of just, that's what it comes down to, affordability.
The Honourable Member for Calgary Shepherd. I'd like to thank the member for Beauport-Limoilou for the question, of course. I think it's the second option, the refusal to listen to the House, where the majority of members voted for these documents to be provided to the House so that they can be provided to the RCMP. It's very simple. Even the Speaker decided that yes, the government is wrong, hasn't provided all of the documents. We've all seen it. It's nothing new with this government. The sponsorship scandal was version 1, I would say, in my lifetime at least, version 1 by the Liberal government of Canada, where corruption was normal.
I don't know what's going on with the CPAC here. I think we're losing connection. Hold on, everybody. Okay, I think we're back. I don't know what happened there.
Relate to financial accountability of this place. But I think New Democrats are also deeply concerned with the issue of ensuring that we have consistency across government. When we see the Conservatives in power or the Liberals in power, it seems that they both only care about financial accountability when they're opposing or trying to get more or additional political points. I have documents here, Madam Speaker, that relate to Ms. Verturen, the political appointee that the member is speaking about. She donated to the Conservatives for the last, since 2017, it's earlier, 2013, she donated thousands of dollars to the Conservative Party. Will the member reject donations from Ms. Verturen, the person who is chair, who was found in conflict of interest? Will the Conservative Party stop donations from the person that they're accusing as being a Liberal insider and, as a matter of fact, is donating to their party thousands of dollars?
The Honourable Member for Calgary Shepherd.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I don't know this person, this Annette Verturen. She's definitely never donated to me. I know every single one of my donors particularly. I would hope that the New Democrats stay on course with us. I think that is the one part where we opposition parties agree, that we are not here to defend Liberal corruption. That is the one thing that through the decades, all parties have agreed, that we are here to stand against the corruption of the Liberal Party of Canada, that we will unite together to ensure that taxpayers and Canadians get the documents, get the truth that they deserve, and that we protect them from those who wish to pick their pockets every single day.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for Sarnia-Lambton.
Mr. Speaker, for the last few days, I've been hearing the Liberals constantly asking to send this matter to PROC. And so I just want Canadians to know what would happen if the matter was referred to PROC based on what we've seen in the previous scandals, and that is that the NDP and the Liberals would filibuster to continue to block the production of documents. Can my honourable colleague comment on what he thinks about that?
The honourable member for Calgary Shepherd.
I hope it never comes to having to do a filibuster anywhere at any committee. It's, you know, as I jokingly say with colleagues, the filibuster is my favorite F word in this place. And particularly at PROC, I have actually been at PROC as a regular member, as a substitute member. I've testified before PROC as well. I hope it doesn't come to that, because in this particular case, all that a filibuster would do and delays would do at a committee would be to give more time to the Liberal Party to find a way out of its current predicament. All we're asking for is for the release of the documents, not to the Conservative Party, not to the official opposition, but to the law clerk. I think it's a very reasonable thing to ask, to release it to somebody who has no political affiliations, no past political preferences that's been expressed publicly. I've seen this done at committee before, where we have demanded documents be produced, and we do it through the law clerk's office. When there are these worries from the government, from the cabinet, that it could be used directly for a partisan purpose. Sometimes there are thousands or tens of thousands of documents, and it's perfectly reasonable. And then they can be passed on to the RCMP in this particular case. And the RCMP can determine what it wants to do. All that a committee would do at this point, if the threat comes about that they would then begin delays called a filibuster, will be just to give themselves more time, potentially with an election that would then end all the procedures of the House, all the processes of the House, and would not be able to get to those documents to hand them to the RCMP, which I think is much more critical. And then the RCMP can do with it what they wish.
All right, I think that's going to do it for me today, everybody. This was about almost an hour extra I did here with the House of Commons proceedings. Thank you all for joining me today. I do not think, I'm going to double check, but I don't think there is any question period next week. No, there is not. There is one tomorrow, but I don't do Friday. So I will see you guys live again on the 21st. So if you are new here, make sure you hit that like button, hit that sub button, hit the notification bell, and I will see you guys in a bit. Actually, maybe there's something on the 16th I might be able to cover, and if there's anything that pops up during that week, I will try my best to cover it. But if not, I will see you for question period on the 21st. Have a good rest of your day or night, and I guess all of next week and the weekend. Have a great Thanksgiving. Eat lots, and I will talk to you guys later.